Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto walked into the training area and noticed several large trees, a small lake and loads of giant rocks. Naruto had arrived at 7:55 a.m. just to be ready. This was Madara. After all, he still couldn't help but wonder why Madara hadn't left the village yet. As he entered the middle of the training ground, he saw Madara warp right in front of him. He was wearing his original samurai outfit and still had his large battle fan on his back. "Good morning, Naruto, it's good to see you're eager," Madara said, showing his Sharingan eyes. Naruto smiled at him but was inwardly seething at the fact this was the person who destroyed his life. "Kid, stop, remember I hate Madara just as much as you, but look, he hasn't left the village and started causing trouble yet. Until then there is nothing you can do," the Kyuubi said, getting a sigh and nod from Naruto. However, Naruto smirked at the thought of annoying the nine-tailed fox. "I think you're going soft," Naruto said, but was quickly shut up by a roar from the Kyuubi. Naruto chuckled at how easy it was to annoy the fox. "Good morning, Madara-sensei," Naruto said, returning back. Madara couldn't help but smile. This boy reminded him so much of his younger brother. They were both trying to do what is right for the world. Madara himself didn't know why he had took a complete liking to the boy. Perhaps it was because he felt sorry for the kid since his family was, or perhaps it was because he saw a little of himself in him. "Okay, Naruto, I need you to tell me something, and you have to be honest. Are you starting to lose your sight?" Madara asked, startling the boy. Naruto was cursing himself for not thinking that part through but smiled at the thought of getting out of this one. "No, why, Madara-sensei?" Naruto asked, trying to play dumb, but Madara quickly glanced at Naruto and his eyes widened. "Naruto, are those your eyes?" Madara asked, already certain about something. "Damn it, no matter what I say here I'm going to sound ridiculous. Alright, think." Naruto thought while trying to think of the best lie he could. "No. I didn't want to tell anyone that my brother damaged my original eyes. After him, a traveling medic found me and replaced my eyes with my brother's. I never realized until I woke up. I felt so ashamed. I'm sorry," Naruto said, looking down, pretending to look sad. Madara sighed. This story was the same as his own. His brother's eyes had stopped him from going blind as well, so who was he judge? "It's alright, Naruto, it just means with your brother's eyes you won't go blind using your Mangekyo," Madara said. Naruto nodded. "Alright, today we're going to see what level you are at, because I know you're higher than a genin level, so don't hold back," Madara said, getting into a fighting stance. Naruto copied his movements and got into his own fighting stance. "Alright, this is a battle I can't win. I also can't use the Rasengan until my dad creates it, so it looks like I'll have to drop my gravity seals to even stand a chance," Naruto thought while deactivating his seals, making his body feel lighter. Naruto rushed forward in an attempt to kick Madara in the face. However, Madara effortlessly caught his foot and threw Naruto to the other side of the training ground. Naruto landed on his feet also effortlessly. "Come on, Naruto, you're going to have to do better than that," Madara said while sinking into the ground. Naruto began to look around, waiting for Madara to pop up. "Okay, where are you?" Naruto thought as he began to take baby steps. The sudden sound of leaves rustling made Naruto turn around and launch a kunai. His eyes widened when he saw the kunai go through Madara and sink into the tree behind him. "Shit, he knows that technique as well," Naruto thought while going through hand seals. "Gukakyu no Jutsu, great fireball technique," Naruto shouted, launching a giant fireball at Madara. Madara saw the giant fireball and smirked. "Interesting, he's perfected the technique and he hasn't even started to use his Sharingan yet. Let's see what you do now, Naruto," Madara thought while allowing the fireball to go through him. "You know that's a very annoying technique, Madara-sensei," Naruto said, pulling out two trench knives with the Hiraishin seal on. "Yes, it may be annoying, but there are other annoying techniques in the world, but the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Madara said, running towards Naruto. Naruto activated his Sharingan and also ran at Madara. He threw one of his Hiraishin knives that Madara allowed to go through him. Just as the knife went all the way through Madara's body, Naruto disappeared in a yellow flash. Madara's Sharingan eyes widened when he saw Naruto disappear. "What? Madara thought, but Madara was sent flying by Naruto, who had kicked him in the back. Madara stopped himself from flying any further and landed on his feet. He turned around and faced Naruto with a small smile. Now who's the one with annoying technique? What was that anyway? I've never seen anything like it, Madara said, still surprised that Naruto had actually hit him. Of course he was holding back a lot, but it was still an amazing feat. Naruto began to think on how he could tell Madara what the technique was without giving away it was father's technique, so when the time came his dad would still be able to create the technique. Who knows, perhaps I'll be showing my father how to do the technique, Naruto thought with a smile. It's an advanced bloodline of the Namikaze clan. It grants the user incredible speed, Naruto said, hoping that Madara would believe him. That's what it is. I thought it had something to do with the seal on the knife, Madara said, eyeing Naruto carefully. Naruto looked at his trench knife in thought. You know, I never thought of doing something like that, but then again I don't need to. These seals are just simple storage seals, Naruto said, making Madara chuckle. Hehehe, you are very funny, Naruto, but why don't we take this fight up a notch, Madara said while going through hand seals. Guka Mekyaku no Jutsu, Great Fire Majestic Removal Technique, Madara shouted, releasing a large fire wall towards Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight of the large firewall. He had copied the hand seals Madara had made, but with the size of the wall it looked like he'd never lived to test the jutsu out. No, I must try, I have too much to lose, Naruto thought as he began to send more chakra to his eyes. Naruto's eyes began to spin until eventually revealed his Mangekyo Sharingan. As the fire looked like it had engulfed Naruto, a giant red figure with armor, a sword and shield appeared, blocking the fire from hitting Naruto. Susanoo, Madara said, smiling. The fires began to die down around the Susanoo as it protected Naruto. Once the fires that left the area completely scorched were gone, Naruto's Susanoo dropped from a full armored warrior to one that was just bones, which finally left, just leaving Naruto, who fell to his knees panting. He looked up through his bangs when he heard the sudden sound of clapping. Impressive. I was expecting you to use your speed again to dodge, but to have used one of the Mangekyo Sharingan techniques, I must say I am impressed. Do you know any other Mangekyo techniques? Madara asked, getting a shake of the head that indicated no. Well, Naruto, you're in luck because I know all of the Mangekyo Sharingan techniques. First we have Susanoo, which protects the user from almost everything. Then we have Amaterasu. It is a technique that creates flames hotter than any other. It's also said that the flames will burn for 7 days and 7 nights. Then we have Tsukuyomi. It is by far the most dangerous. It doesn't do damage to the body physically, it attacks the mind, but it can also affect the user as well, so be careful if you ever use it, okay? Madara said, looking at Naruto seriously. Naruto nodded. Finally we have Kamui. It is the most difficult technique to gain. It has the ability to warp and teleport people. Also, when one has reached the highest level of Kamui, they will be able to the technique I did, which allowed weapons, jutsus and even people to go through me, Madara said, getting an astonished look from Naruto. So that's how he did it. I wonder how Kakashi-sensei achieved that level. Sasuke and Itachi couldn't even do that. How am I? Naruto thought, not realizing Madara was waving his hand in front of Naruto's face. Hey Naruto, Madara asked, waiting for the blonde to respond. Naruto snapped out of his thoughts and scratched the back of his head while smiling sheepishly. Madara-sensei, I was wondering, how do you know so much about the Mangekyo Sharingan? I mean, is there a scroll or did someone tell you? Naruto asked, surprising Madara. Yes, there is a scroll about the Mangekyo Sharingan, however I have hidden the scroll, as I fear the Uchiha clan would do what is required to gain the Mangekyo. To this day I regretting my best friend. But at the time I had to, it was for the good of the Uchiha, Madara said, showing a hint of sadness in his voice. He was slightly surprised that he would talk so openly about this. It was the first time since his brother. He looked at Naruto and could see him completely concentrating on him. He didn't know what it was, but there was just something about Naruto that just made him trust the young blonde. He sighed and began to continue the story. There is also a stage above the Mangekyo, which me and you have, the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, but to obtain it comes at an even greater price. You must take the eyes of your brothers, Izuna. He was my younger brother, strong. Talented and kind, we both had obtained the Mangekyo for the good of the clan to keep us at the top. If you were not at the top, your clan would be slaughtered. I was the head of the Uchiha clan, but the disadvantage of the Mangekyo Sharingan is it leaves you blind over time. It's a punishment I received. However, with me being as weak as I was at the time, we were vulnerable. We were on the verge of being destroyed by other clans. Madara sighed as he looked into the air, sorrow and regret in his eyes. Then Izuna came to me offering his eyes. I refused at first, but we began to lose more Uchiha every day. I took his eyes, at the cost of my brother's life. After that I destroyed anyone who threatened the Uchiha clan. We were only rivaled by the Senju clan. However, eventually the clans joined together and created villages. The Uchiha clan formed Konohagakure with the Senju clan. However, it was a Senju that was nominated to be the leader. It frustrated me at first. In fact, a couple of years ago I was actually planning on leaving the village. But I needed something to believe in. Then you came. For the first time in years I had found purpose again. You remind me so much of myself and Izuna, but you have far more potential than either of us. Madara finished looking at a wide-eyed Naruto. Naruto listened to Madara's story. It was unbelievable that this was the same Madara that had defected from Konoha and wanted to put the world into a infinite Tsukuyomi. Even then he wanted peace, but his mind was warped by the Rakudo Sennin into believing that he needed all the tailed beasts. I must help him. I nearly let the Rakudo Sennin control me when I lost of everything, Naruto thought before smiling. Well, as your student I promise to make you proud, Naruto said, giving Madara a thumbs up. Madara smiled and started chuckling, then eventually started laughing. Ha 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 ha, I'm sure you will, Naruto. I'm sure you will, Madara said, turning towards the entrance on the training ground and finding an Uchiha Junin and 3 genin. Naruto immediately recognized Jin, who was smirking. Madara-sama, I'm sorry, I did not realize you and your apprentice were training here. We will leave immediately, the Uchiha Junin said, wiping the smirk of Jin's face. What? Why do we have to leave? There are no more empty training grounds, Jin said, making Madara frown. Know your place, genin, Madara said, making Jin back down straight away. Madara-sama, even though Jin did speak out of line, what he said was true. There are no empty training grounds available. Can we share the training ground with you? The Uchiha Junin asked. Sure. Just stay out of mine and Naruto's way, Madara said, getting a nod from the Junin. Of course, Madara-sama, the Junin said, then turning to Naruto, it was good to finally meet you, Naruto-sama. Jin looked on in shock. His Junin sensei saw Naruto as his superior. What did that make him? No, this can't be happening, that loser. Why did Madara-sama choose him? I am the elite genius of the Uchiha clan, Jin thought, his anger flaring. Madara-sama, why did you pick him to be your apprentice? He's a nobody. His clan is so weak they got wiped out. Why didn't you pick someone from the Uchiha clan to train? Jin asked. The Uchiha Junin was about to yell at Jin but was stopped by the sound of Madara's voice. You dare speak to me and my apprentice like that? Just so you know, the reason the Namikaze clan are mostly wiped out is because they were used as front-line soldiers in the war. Their speed had no rival. And for your information, Naruto is related to the Uchiha clan. He has achieved a fully matured Sharingan while you have not, Madara said coldly, enjoying the look of shock on Jin's face. Jin looked at Naruto, anger burning in his coal-black eyes. He has the Sharingan. Was he even trying when we battled? How dare he fool me? I'm an elite, I'll show him. You loser, Jin said, pointing at Naruto. Fight me? Everyone raised their eyebrows at Jin. Alright, I'm surprised though, especially after the beating I gave you last time, Naruto said, smiling and ignoring the look of complete hatred Jin was giving him. No, Madara said, surprising everyone. This fight is unfair. It will be you four, Madara said while pointing at Team 1-inch vs Naruto. Madara finished getting wide eyes from everyone. Madara-sama, are you sure that is wise? No disrespect to Naruto-sama, but isn't that a little much? The Uchiha Junin said. No, just do it, Madara said, getting a nod from the Junin. Naruto got into a fighting position, ignoring the fact he was still exhausted from his fight with Madara. The Uchiha Junin, Jin and his 2 teammates also got into a fighting position. However, Jin in his rage against Naruto charged head-on, his Sharingan blazing to life. His two teammates quickly followed, leaving the Junin to sigh at his team's foolishness. "I'll defeat you Namikaze and show everyone you're not so great," Jin said, going through hand seals. Gukaku no Jutsu, great fireball technique. Naruto almost laughed the size of the furball Jin had made. However, knowing not to underestimate anything, he went through a number of hand seals. Suiryuden no Jutsu, water dragon projectile technique. Naruto shouted, suddenly forming a large water dragon that flew towards the fireball. As soon as both justice collided, the fireball completely vanished, letting the water dragon fly towards Jin and his teammates, who was completely startled that Jin's best jutsu had been so easily defeated. When the water dragon hit Jin in the chest, he was sent flying back along with his two teammates. However, before they hit something causing further damage to themselves, the Junin sensei had quickly caught them and placed their unconscious bodies on the floor. "Impressive, Naruto-sama, it seems I am not to underestimate you," the Junin said, running at Naruto. Naruto saw the Junin sprint towards him. Naruto noticed the fully matured Sharingan active in the Junin's eye and cursed. "Damn, I barely survived against Madara-sensei and he was holding back a lot. This Junin doesn't seem to be holding back one little bit," Naruto thought while activating his fully matured Sharingan and watched the chakra pattern the Junin had so he could anticipate his next movements. The Junin went to land a punch on Naruto, who easily caught the punch and used it to launch himself in the air and landing behind the man. Naruto went to swipe his feet but went unsuccessful as the Junin jumped in the air and roundhouse kicked Naruto, sending him flying back. Naruto quickly caught himself and backflipped into a standing position. Naruto pulled out one of his trench knife and began to channel wind chakra towards it. The Uchiha Junin had to admit Naruto was good high Chunin level at least. His Sharingan eyes widened when he saw the trench knife glow blue. Through his Sharingan eyes he saw the wind chakra Naruto was using, and in one word, he was amazed that Naruto knew something only Junins should know. Madara also was shocked when he saw the blade was enhanced with wind chakra. He knew Naruto was tired from their spar, and honestly he thought Naruto would never beat the Junin. However, the boy was surprising him more and more. Naruto launched the trench knife towards the Junin at an incredible speed. The Junin was just able to move out of the way but was caught off guard by the little cut he had received on his cheek. "Impressive, Naruto-sama. I understand why Madara-sama picked you," the Junin said, wiping the blood of his cheek. "However, I will show you why I am a Junin," the Uchiha said, running towards Naruto at full speed. "Shit, his speed is no way near mine was in my adult body, but in this body I'm not sure I'll be able to dodge," Naruto thought while watching the Junin get closer. The Junin jumped in the air a couple of meters away from Naruto and went through a selection of hand seals. "Goryuka no Jutsu, great dragon fire technique," the Junin shouted, releasing 3 giant fire dragons out towards Naruto. Naruto saw the hand seals the Junin went through and quickly copied them. He gasped when he realized what he was doing. However, "No, I'm becoming a jutsu thief. No, as long as it's not an original technique it won't bother me. The Sharingan is nothing but a tool." Naruto, however, unable to move due to the speed of the dragons, did the only thing he could think of doing. He sent as much chakra as he could to his eyes. However, instead of staying on his Mangekyo Sharingan, the red background suddenly started to go purple and his black swirl in the middle turned into a little black hole with rings around it. "Shinra Tensei. Divine Judgment," Naruto shouted, blowing everything around him away. The fire dragons disappeared instantly under the pressure. The Junin was also sent back, bouncing off the floor a few times before finally falling on the floor unconscious. Madara stood there wide-eyed at what he was seeing. Naruto's eyes had changed yet again. The Rinnegan, but how and was that the power the Rinnegan? That was just a glimpse of the Rinnegan. If Naruto could gain complete control, he would be the most powerful shinobi ever. And I would be the one who trained him. I knew there was more to you, Naruto, but I never knew it would be this, Madara thought while looking at the panting Naruto, who was barely conscious. "Naruto, do you know what that was?" Madara asked, picking up the Junin and walking towards Naruto. Naruto looked up, his Rinnegan eyes still active. He could see different chakra wavelengths and some barrier seals. Naruto slowly looked towards Madara, who was walking towards him, and shook his head. No, sensei. Naruto lied. He knew it was the Rinnegan, but truthfully he didn't know that much about it himself. Madara smiled and put a hand on Naruto's shoulder once he had put the Junin he was carrying down. Let's take these four to the hospital, then we will go see Hokage-sama about this. Who knows, you might get to see your girlfriend, Madara teased, making Naruto blush. I have no idea what or who you are on about, Naruto said, finally standing up and picking up his trench knife and putting it in its holder. Madara laughed at Naruto before grabbing the four unconscious and teleporting away. After several seconds of waiting, Madara appeared again and motioned Naruto to follow, which he did immediately. As Naruto and Madara walked through the village, Naruto couldn't help but notice how friendlier Madara was to the civilians. As they were about to reach the Hokage's training ground, Madara stopped outside Rero's. Naruto looked at Madara in confusion and followed him into the store. When Madara and Naruto walked in, they noticed the store was practically empty. Madara turned to Naruto. Naruto, I'm going to allow you to pick anything from the store and I will get it for you. Think of it as a present that symbolizes you are my student, Madara said, smiling when he saw Naruto nod and walk over to the counter. Ah, good day, Rero-san, Naruto said, smiling at the old man behind the counter. Rero smiled when he saw it was Naruto. Hello, Naruto-san, it's good to see you again. I trust the knives I gave you work well, Rero said as he examined the trench knives again. Yes, they are perfect. I was wondering, however, Rero-san, if you had anything new in, Naruto asked, getting a large grin from Rero. Actually, Naruto, I have. Ever since you showed me where to get the metal that allows chakra to flow, I finally made my first sword with the stuff here. Look, Rero said while handing Naruto his trench knives back and pulling out a large box. When Rero removed the lid of the box, he picked the sword up and unsheathed it and gave it to Naruto. The sword was a thin blade with a simple blue handle. It was light but strong. Just imagine the sword Sasuke had when Team 7 met him at Orochimaru's base. Naruto channeled wind chakra into the blade and was amazed when the blade was immediately surrounded by wind chakra. He gave it a practice swing and was again amazed when a heavy gust of wind blew around the store. Madara walked over to Naruto and smiled when he saw he had already picked what he wanted. So Naruto, thinking of picking up Kenjutsu, I must say, not a bad blade, an excellent choice, especially when you become famous, Madara said, giving Rero a slip of paper. Rero looked at the slip of paper and became wide-eyed. There was certainly enough to pay for the sword, well, about 20 swords to be precise. Thank you, Rero-san, Naruto shouted, strapping the sword around his waist so it was facing his back. Rero could only nod as he watched Madara and Naruto walk out of the shop. If Naruto becomes famous, then so will the sword, then everyone will come to me for business, Rero ended his thought while chuckling madly. Naruto and Madara walked into training ground 7. Madara's eyes still indicated he had his Sharingans active. Naruto wondered how he could keep them on for so long but decided to just leave it. They both heard the sound of fighting and were surprised to see Tsunade, Jiraiya and Orochimaru still fighting Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage. Also, these are your brats, monkey boy, Madara said, smirking at the sight of Hiruzen training 3 genin. Good to see you again, Madara-sama. Not that I don't mind, but why are you here? Don't you have an apprentice to train? Hiruzen asked, knocking the 3 genin down effortlessly. I have some information you might find interesting, Hokage-sama, but it is best you gather the council, Madara said, then looking at his student. You can have the rest of the day off, but tomorrow we will continue with our training and we will start doing some missions. Madara finished walking over towards Hiruzen while Naruto walked over to the 3 down genins and smiled. Hard to believe these 3 are going to be the legendary Sannin. Naruto smiled as he saw the 3 genin started to stir. Are you 3 just going to lay there all day? Naruto said while poking Jiraiya and Tsunade in the head while Orochimaru was chuckling as he stood up. Naruto, if you poke me in the head one more time, I'm going to hit you again, Tsunade said while sitting up and giving an all too familiar smile. Naruto paled and backed off and watched Jiraiya stand up. Hiruzen looked at his student's interaction with Naruto and smiled. He had just finished the bell test with his students and began training them. Of course the three of them could never get along. Jiraiya would insult Orochimaru for being better than him while Orochimaru also insulted Jiraiya for being an idiot. Tsunade however usually split the two up before they began to fight, and now it looked like Naruto could get along with just about anyone. Okay you three, I'm off, you can have the rest of the day off, but I want you here in the morning at 6 and no not 7 Jiraiya-kun, Hiruzen said, glaring slightly at Jiraiya, who nodded in acceptance. Okay let's go, Madara said, teleporting away from the training ground, closely followed by Hiruzen, who shunshined out of there. So what are you three going to do now? Naruto asked, already regretting the question when Jiraiya stood up with a notepad. I'm going to do a little research, Jiraiya said, winking at Naruto. Naruto facepalmed at Jiraiya's antics but smiled inwardly. Baka, Tsunade said, picking Jiraiya up by his collar. Stop being pervaded. Tsunade finished by punching Jiraiya considerably far, considering she hadn't perfected her chakra control technique. How about you, Orochimaru? Naruto asked. Well, I was going to do some training, but it looks like I'll go help the idiot to the hospital. See you later. Orochimaru ran towards Jiraiya's prone body and put an arm around his shoulder. They're secretly friends, aren't they? Naruto asked, getting a giggle from Tsunade. Yeah, they made a secret pact to make it look like they hate each other to put enemies off taking one of them hostage, Tsunade said, looking at Naruto, but quickly noticed the sword around Naruto's waist. Where did you get that sword, Naruto? Tsunade asked, watching Naruto unsheath the blade. Ah, this thing Madara-sensei bought me it as a gift, Naruto said, trying not to give too much away about the blade. Tsunade looked at Naruto with narrowed eyes. She was smart enough to tell when Naruto was not telling her anything, but decided to leave it anyway. Well, since we have the day off, want to go train at Senju compound? Tsunade asked, slightly blushing. Naruto smiled at Tsunade. He still found it funny to see Tsunade blush. He was glad to see she was not like Sakura and consistently stalked someone, so they would go out on a date. Okay, Tsunade-chan, Naruto said while smiling, especially when he saw her face turn red at the suffix. As Naruto and Tsunade walked through the compound, he couldn't help but notice how empty the place seemed. He looked towards Tsunade and could also see her frowning. So this is what Tsunade meant when she said she had lost too much in Konoha. Maybe Dan and Naoki were the last straws. Speaking of Naoki, Naruto thought with a smile as he saw the 7-year-old run towards him with Mito. Naoki had light brown spiky hair and could be seen with 2 little oval red marks on each cheek. Oh, thank God you're back, Tsunade-chan. I need you to look after Naoki-chan while I go to a meeting, Mito said, then turning to Naruto. Oh, hello Naruto-kun, you seem to be getting taller every day, Mito said. Naruto gave her a small smile and watched her shunshin away. Tsunade-ni-chan, are you and Naruto-ni-san going to teach me some cool jutsus now? Naoki asked, hope in his eyes. Tsunade sighed at her younger brother. He was always asking her or Naruto to teach him. Naruto, however, smiled at Naoki. The young Senju was so carefree it reminded Naruto of how he used to be. Naoki even had the same dream as the old Naruto to become Hokage. Now that I'm here, Naoki, I promise you won't die like last time, Naruto thought while watching the hyperactive boy pull both his and Tsunade's hand to the training ground. Naoki-chan, before I decide to teach you anything, why don't you show me what you have learned at the academy so far? Naruto said, getting a groan from Naoki. But Nisan Thati never show us anything cool, all we do is practice throwing kunai and shuriken, Naoki said, hoping to hide the fact he had throwing exercises. Show me, Naruto said, smiling, knowing what Naoki was hiding, while Tsunade on the other hand was wondering why Naoki was being so shy to show Naruto something. Usually her brother was always showing Naruto the cool things he had learnt. As the three of them made it to the training ground, Naruto watched Naoki hesitantly pull some shurikens out and proceeded to concentrate on the practice dummy up ahead. When Naoki threw all his shurikens, he lowered his head in shame when he noticed all but one of his shuriken missed. You know, in order to become Hokage you need to be able to throw straight, Naruto said seriously. Naoki turned around, tears in his eyes, crushed over the fact Naruto would say that. Tsunade was about to shout at Naruto for putting her brother down but was stopped when she saw the smirk growing on Naruto's face. So looks like I'll have to teach you how, then I will show you something cool, okay? Naruto finished, but before he could blink Naoki had tackled him into a hug while crying. Thank you Nisan, thank you. Naoki cried into Naruto's chest, unaware of the fact Tsunade was smiling. Well, while you train Naoki, I'm going to read some medical jutsu books, Tsunade said, leaving Naruto and Naoki in the training ground. In the Senju compound, the sound of a heavily panting Naoki could be heard. As the young boy had been training with Naruto all day, Naruto had spent hours showing Naoki how to throw kunais and shuriken. They had spent a little time sparring, however it was more of a test to see if Naoki could actually land a hit. Naoki had finally fell over exhausted. No fair, Ni-san, I couldn't even land a hit on you, Naoki complained while laying on his back panting. Naruto smiled while ruffling Naoki's hair. Oh come on, you nearly had me a few times. You've got to remember I've been doing this longer than you have, but I will say you are extremely good for your age, Naruto said, getting laughing when he saw Naoki quickly sit up. Really Ni-san, you think I'm good? I can't wait to tell everyone, Naoki said excitedly, getting a surprised look from Naruto. Naoki caught onto Naruto looking at him surprised and blushed. Well, it's just everyone talks about how cool you are, even the teachers talk about how you are a genius. It's just. Well, I want that type of respect, Naoki said, looking down. Naruto smiled at the young Senju. It was clear Naoki wanted to be like him. Well Naoki, if you want to be a genius, then be the genius of hard work, train every day, and I have no doubts you will surpass any natural-born genius, Naruto laughed when he saw Naoki jump up with fire in his eyes. Alright Ni-san, it's time to spar again, Naruto stood up smiling at Naoki's enthusiasm. Okay Naoki-chan, let's see what you've got. Naruto slowly unsheathed his sword as he watched Naoki throw some shuriken. Good job, I showed him how to throw properly, Naruto thought, deflecting the shuriken effortlessly. Naoki ran at Naruto hoping to land a punch on Naruto, however Naruto stopped the punch with one finger and pushed it out of the way. Come on Naoki, I know you can do better than that, Naruto said, sidestepping a kick aimed for his chest. Stay still and fight Ni-san, Naoki said, slightly annoyed. Naruto was toying with him. Shrugging, Naruto disappeared behind Naoki and hit him in the back of the head with the blunt end of the sword, swiftly knocking Naoki out. You did good today Naoki, Naruto said, picking up Naoki and walking towards the house. As Naruto entered the house with the still unconscious Naoki in his hands, he began to sweat when he saw Tsunade tapping her foot on the floor. What did you do to him Naruto? Tsunade asked, giving Naruto an all-too-familiar smile, making him panic. We were sparring in. Naruto was cut off by Mito placing a hand on his shoulder. Well, it seems Naoki-chan has overworked himself again. That boy, he's so desperate to catch up to you Naruto-kun, Mito said, smiling at her grandson. Naruto also smiled as he put Naoki down on the sofa. Yeah, the little squirt is really determined. Tsunade walked over to Naoki, pushed a bit of hair out of his eyes. Yeah, but I think he's more stubborn than anything, Tsunade said. So anyway, what were you reading Tsunade while me and Naoki were training? Naruto asked, sitting down on another chair. Tsunade's face brightened up, excited at her newfound hobby. Wait there, I'll show you, she said, running upstairs, making Naruto facefo and Mito sigh. So Naruto-kun, I hear you've gotten another bloodline. You're quite the talk of the council meetings these days, Mito said, smiling when she saw Naruto sigh. Great, another reason to be praised, Naruto said sarcastically. You want to see it? Naruto asked, getting a nod from Mito. Naruto's eyes immediately changed from blue to red and then finally stopped at purple with silver rings. Mito gasped at the sight of the Rinnegan. So this is the famous Jujutsu. I must say I've never met an Uzumaki who has had it before, Mito asked curiously. Maybe it awakens when the user is under too much stress like the Sharingan, Naruto answered, getting an annoyed grunt from the Kyuubi. I already told you that, you damn copycat, the Kyuubi muttered before going back to sleep. If that's the case, we should keep this between ourselves. I'm sure you don't want to be used as a breeding machine, Mito said, getting a serious nod, knowing some of the power-hungry fools in the village. They continued to talk about the powers of the Rinnegan but were interrupted by a loud crash at the stairs. Both Uzumaki looked towards the stairs to see Tsunade piled under tons of books. Picking up one of the books that had landed near him, Naruto read the front cover. Medical Ninjutsu for Beginners. Interesting. I'm impressed. You need really good chakra control to do medical. Just you, Naruto said, getting a surprised look from Tsunade. Yeah, but how did you know? Tsunade asked, curious as to how Naruto knew about medical ninjutsu. Well, my Oni-chan works at the hospital and she had really good chakra control, Naruto answered, but was suddenly lifted up by his collar by Tsunade. Really, you know someone who works at the hospital? Do you reckon she'll teach me some stuff? Tsunade asked hopefully. Yeah, probably, Naruto answered, but was suddenly crushed into a hug by Tsunade, making him blush. Tsunade also began to blush when she had realized the position she was in and immediately backed off, stuttering apologies. After several hours of talking, Naruto had decided it was time for him to go home, saying his farewells to the three. Promise you'll come back again, Ni-san? Nawaki asked. He was always sad when Naruto would leave. It was also the fact that no one would believe him that he knew Naruto. Smiling at the young boy, Naruto crouched down, ruffling Nawaki's hair. Naruto tapped his own wrist. Suddenly a poof of smoke appeared. Once the smoke had disappeared, revealing a set of weights, Naruto passed them to the young boy. He had hidden a Hiraishin seal onto them so he could transport to Nawaki whenever. Why you're giving me these? Nawaki asked with tears in his eyes. Naruto smiled and nodded. He was literally taken back by the hug Nawaki had give him, but smiled nonetheless. Standing up, Naruto faced Mito and Tsunade. By Mito Bachan, Suan-chan, Naruto said quickly, running away to avoid a beating from Mito. That boy, Mito smirked. She then took a look at her granddaughter, who had a longing look written clearly across her face. Don't worry, you'll see your boyfriend again, Tsunade-chan, Mito said, smirking at her granddaughter. Tsunade turned, blushed bright red and ran off shouting, Obaa-chan. Naruto and Numi's apartment. Naruto walked into the apartment he had lived in ever since he had traveled back in time. As he walked into the front room, he noticed Numi wearing a thin nightgown. Smirking slightly at his Oni-chan, Naruto walked towards one of the other chairs in the room and sat down and smiled. Hello, Oni-chan. Amono-sensei, Naruto said, chuckling at Numi's reaction. Slowly, Amono raised his head from behind the chair Numi was sitting on. Naruto laughed at both Numi and Amono's reaction. He had known they had been going out ever since Naruto had put Jin in the hospital. During one of the times, Jin thought he could beat Naruto when he was off guard. Please, Oni-chan, I'm not an idiot. As long as Amono-sensei doesn't hurt you, I'll let him live, Naruto said, chuckling, making Amono gulp. However, Numi hit Naruto over the head. Don't play overprotective brother on me, Naru-chan, Numi said, causing Naruto to nod in fear. As powerful as he was, Numi always scared Naruto. Naruto stood up, smiling. Okay, Oni-chan. Naruto suddenly became nervous. Oni-chan, I think it's time for me to move out. Numi suddenly became serious. Why? You don't have to, Naru-chan, Numi asked. She didn't want Naruto to move out but knew he had his own life to live. Well, I think it's time I moved into the Namikaze compound, Naruto said, saddened by Numi's sad face. Hey, don't worry, this way Amono-sensei can move in with you and it's not like I won't see you again. I'll come visit, Naruto said, making Numi smile a little. You promise? Numi asked. Hi, it's a promise and I never break my promises. Naruto went over and hugged Numi, which she immediately returned. Once Naruto let go, he walked over to Amono, who had his top off, and reached his hand out. Amono was uncertain but reached his hand out as well, meeting in a handshake. I'm leaving my Oni-chans with you, Amono-sensei, look after her, Naruto said, getting a smile and a nod from the academy teacher. Alright, I'm going to bed. I'll start packing my stuff tomorrow. Please keep it down and don't go making me an uncle already, Naruto said, finishing the last part by running into his room, ignoring the thump on his door courtesy of an extremely angry Numi. 2 weeks later, Naruto was storming around the village with a very amused Madara. Naruto ignored the looks he was getting from the villagers as right now he did not care. Stupid D-rank missions, Naruto muttered under his breath with only Madara hearing it. Madara let out a small laugh. Over the last 2 weeks Madara had been training Naruto in mostly fire jutsus but was also beginning to teach him how to use some of the Mangekyo techniques, but right now he found it amusing that his apprentice was moaning over doing simple D-rank missions. However, Naruto also found a way out of that as well. Well, almost. Hey, stop moaning, you're not even doing the slave work your clones are, Madara said as they entered the Hokage's tower. Yeah, but I still get all of their memories. Do you know how annoying it is to get a memory about painting a fence or walking a dog? It's so boring, Naruto whined, getting a small chuckle from Madara. Well, you have done a fair few. Maybe we could go pick up AC rank. Amusing as it is to watch you complain, I am getting a little bored as well, Madara said. Yeah, I guess AC rank will do for now, but I was talking more about B and A rank missions, Naruto said, getting a sigh from Madara. No matter how strong you are, your rank is still genin, so the monkey brat won't let you take anything higher than AC rank. Don't worry though, I have recommended you for the Chunin exams and I'm certain you'll be promoted, Madara said, opening the door to Hokage's room. Once Naruto and Madara entered the room, they immediately sweat dropped as there sat Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, doing paperwork, ignoring the fact his genin were wrestling. Jiraiya and Orochimaru both had each other in a headlock while Tsunade was hitting both of them on the head. Old man? Naruto asked, making the occupants of the room look at him. I'm not that old, damn it. Hiruzen answered. He didn't mind Naruto not calling Hokage-sama like most people did. It was refreshing. He also knew it was Naruto's way of showing respect. Ah yes, Naruto-kun, what can I do for you and Madara-sama? Hiruzen asked, happy he had something to keep paperwork off his mind. Madara stepping in front of Naruto and turning on his professional mode. Yes, Hokage-sama, we came to request AC rank mission, Madara said, surprising the three genin on the floor in the Hokage. Hiruzen began to look through files on his desk, stopping and pulling one. He began to read the paper in front of him. I'm surprised you haven't come for AC rank mission earlier. You have certainly done enough D ranks. 211, that's impressive considering, Hiruzen said, getting surprised looks from his three genin. However, Naruto glared angrily at Madara over the fact it was Madara who told him he hadn't done enough D ranks. Ah yes, here's a mission for you. Your mission is to protect a small village from a group of bandits. However, you will also be taking another team with you. My team, to be precise, since I can't get out of the office often and you are the only person I would trust with my genin team, Madara-sama. Madara nodded. Jiraiya began to jump up and down, excited he was going to be doing AC rank. Orochimaru was also excited but didn't show it, and Tsunade, well, she was just as excited as Jiraiya. Hiruzen threw a scroll to Madara in which he caught effortlessly. He took a quick glance at the scroll and placed it in one of his pouches. Okay, meet me at the north gate in 1 hour and don't be late, Madara said, warping away, leaving 3 scared genin and 1 smirking. I have so got to learn that, Naruto said, mostly to himself. Yeah, I'd be able to get some good research done with that technique, Jiraiya said, making Naruto smile. However, Tsunade did not find as funny and punched Jiraiya in the head. Be quiet, pervert, Tsunade shouted at the downed Jiraiya, making Naruto laugh and Orochimaru and Hiruzen sigh. Okay, you four, you have 1 hour before you have to go. Why don't you go get packed and do some training? Hiruzen asked, hoping to get them to go. All the genins nodded. Naruto looked over to the 3 genins with a smirk. I'm going to be at training ground 7, if any you want to spar, but I can understand if you're to chicken and don't want to show up, Naruto said, disappearing in a yellow flash. I'm so going to kick his, Jiraiya shouted before running out of the room. Tsunade turned around but sighed once she saw Orochimaru had already followed Jiraiya. Them two don't realize Naruto-kun wanted them to come after him, idiots, Tsunade said, not realizing she had added the kun suffix. So it's Naruto-kun now, is it, Tsunade-chan? Hiruzen chuckled once he saw Tsunade run out shouting pervert. Training Ground 7. Naruto had already packed all of his essentials into one scroll and was now sitting cross-legged on top of the water in the middle of Training Ground 7. He smiled when he felt 3 chakra signatures try to sneak up on him. Standing up slowly, Naruto unsheathed his sword slowly and began to channel Raiden chakra into it, surprising the 3 genin. Jiraiya, being Jiraiya, jumped out hoping to land a kick on Naruto, sidestepping it effortlessly. Naruto tapped Jiraiya's leg with the blunt end of the sword, electrocuting him. Jiraiya slowly began to sink in the water. Seeing their teammate defeated, both Tsunade and Orochimaru jumped out hoping to land a kick on Naruto, backflip making Tsunade and Orochimaru narrowly miss each other. Naruto was caught off guard, however, when Jiraiya appeared from underneath the water attempting to land an uppercut on Naruto. Smiling at Jiraiya's attempt, Naruto leaned his head back, narrowly missing the blow. Thinking fast, Naruto kicked Jiraiya in the stomach, sending him skidding across the water near Tsunade and Orochimaru. The 3 genin, slightly out of breath, silently they all nodded to each other and stopped flowing chakra to their feet and allowed their bodies to fall into the water. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto sheathed his sword and stood up straight. Closing his eyes, Naruto began to use his other senses. The sudden sound of the water splitting made Naruto sidestep, avoiding a kick that was aimed at his chest courtesy of Tsunade. Opening his eyes, Naruto smirked at Tsunade when he saw her stunned expression. Turning around, he saw Orochimaru and Jiraiya appear from underneath the water with stunned expressions also. "What? You didn't expect me to always rely on my eyes?" Naruto said, getting into a fighting stance. "Prepare yourself." Naruto disappeared, making the wind pick up, causing the 3 genin to close their eyes. As Orochimaru, Jiraiya and Tsunade opened their eyes, they were surprised to see Naruto behind them in a crouching position with his sword out. They were about to attack but were stopped by the sound of Naruto's voice. "I win. Check your necks," Naruto said, still in the same position. The other 3 checked their necks and widened their eyes when they felt a little bit of blood. It was nothing more than a small cut, but it was enough to show them that Naruto could have them. "You're all good. Probably the best teamwork I've seen, but I saw through all your strategies. It was nothing but luck that stopped me from falling into your wire trap at the start. You took a risk. If I had blocked you, the wire would have tied around me. However, when I jumped out of the way, I stopped the plan. But nice try. Definitely Chunin level planning and strength," Naruto said, making them smile. The 4 genin went to the side of the river and laid on the grass, just looking at the clouds. They still had 20 minutes before they had to meet Madara. "So any of you started to learn elemental manipulation yet?" Naruto asked, getting curious looks from the 3. They of course knew what the elements were, but what they didn't know is what element they had. "What element do you have, Naruto-kun?" Orochimaru asked, curious to find any advantage he could have over Naruto. Naruto smiled and raised his hand with all his finger and thumb extended. "I have all 5 due to my bloodline. Well, actually I have 6 if you count gravity as 1, Naruto said, getting wide eyes from the 3. "What bloodline do you have?" Jiraiya asked, extremely interested in what type of bloodline could give you that many elemental advantages. Naruto proceeded to tell the 3 about the Rinnegan and some of its advantages. North Gate. Naruto and the other 3 genin were waiting for Madara at the North Gate. Jiraiya, Tsunade and Orochimaru all had their backpacks on, while Naruto just had a scroll. Naruto was practicing his Mangekyo Sharingan technique, the Kamui. He had been practicing for several weeks. The best he could do, however, was to warp a small rock away. Tsunade was practicing punching a tree, leaving noticeable marks, proving she was beginning to perfect her chakra control. Jiraiya was sitting in the shade sleeping, while Orochimaru was reading a book on elemental jutsus. The sudden appearance of Madara warping in front of them made them all look up, well except for Jiraiya. Madara gained a tick mark on his head when he saw Jiraiya asleep and threw a rock at Jiraiya, hitting him directly on the forehead where his height was. Naruto laughed at the sight of Jiraiya, muttering something about not being able to sleep without rocks being thrown at him. "Alright, the village is a day's travel, so be prepared for anything when we get there," Madara said, getting nods from the 3. Immediately they all jumped into the trees. "So Madara-sensei, am I going to be in the Chunin exams?" Naruto asked eagerly, earning raised eyebrows from everyone. Madara chuckled, however. Yes, you are, but the exams will be held in Iwagakure and they aren't known for their kindness, Madara said, sighing when his apprentice completely ignored the warning and was more bothered about the fact he was entered into the Chunin exams. Madara looked at the other three genin. You three will probably be in it as well. Being trained by the Hokage, it will get a lot of important people to come and Konoha will probably send their best genin, Madara said, getting smirks from the three. After several hours of traveling, Madara turned to see that even though the four genins were not showing it, he could tell that they were tired. Deciding it was time for a rest, he stopped making the genin stop. Naruto was cursing his younger body. His old body could have traveled this without breaking a sweat, yet here he was tired. Looking over at the other three, he could tell they were exhausted. Alright, we're going to set up camp here tonight. We'll make it to the village first thing in the morning. We'll also take turns in watching the camp. Naruto, you're first, then Tsunade, then Orochimaru, and finally Jiraiya. Okay, Madara said, getting nods. As everyone went into their tent, Naruto jumped onto the branch hovering above the camp and sat there. He turned suddenly at the presence of Tsunade, who sat down next to him, smiling and slightly blushing when she laid her head on his shoulder. Can't sleep, huh? Naruto asked, getting a slow nod from Tsunade. Naruto sighed. The two of them sat there for a good 20 minutes before Tsunade started talking. Naruto, can you tell me about your life before you came to the village? Tsunade asked, looking at Naruto's eyes. Naruto panicked slightly but was calmed down by the sound of the Kyuubi. Just tell her a lie, you idiot, the Kyuubi said, getting a mental nod from Naruto. Well, my life was not entirely bad before my brothered my family. I mean, there was one point we were like best friends, you know, do training and stuff, but I still miss him even though he did become a bit of a psychopath, Naruto said, giggling, remembering Sasuke and all the time they had spent together. My mother, she was scary but also very caring. Naruto thought fondly of Kushina. I remember this story she told me about when she was younger and other boys used to pick on her because she had red hair and round face. They used to call her Tomato, Naruto said, chuckling along with Tsunade continuing his story. Naruto swiped one of his bangs away from his eyes. However, when I said my mother was scary, I mean the boys never called her Tomato again after she squashed them. Naruto then began to think about his father. It was weird to think that his parents were not even born yet, but it was also a nice feeling as it meant he would get to meet them, even save them. My father, well, he was strong. I remember this one time when we were training and every time I'd try land a hit on him, he would just move and humiliate me and teach me a lesson at the same time. Naruto smiled at the thought of his father and his two perverted senseis Kakashi and Jiraiya. Naruto looked down at Tsunade to see she was fast asleep on his shoulder, slightly cuddling his arm. He smiled even though he hadn't told the exact truth. It was all based on the truth well of what he knew anyway, but the important thing for him was that it felt better to just tell someone. Naruto stayed there with Tsunade, who slept on his arm all the way through her shift, but Naruto didn't mind. However, the presence of another chakra signature made Naruto turn around. Orochimaru walked over to Naruto and nodded. It's my turn now, Naruto, you just go get some sleep, Orochimaru said, getting a small smile from Naruto. Hi, thanks, Naruto said, picking Tsunade up and dropping to the floor. Walking into Tsunade's tent, Naruto placed Tsunade down. He was about to move but was stopped as he realized Tsunade had not let go of his arm. After trying several times to free himself, Naruto sighed. You're going to me in the morning, Tsunade-chan, Naruto said, laying down next to her, to which immediately Tsunade rested her head on his shoulder. Naruto was running away, cuts and bruises all over his body. He was at least 17 and wore an orange samurai outfit, a height with twin spikes that framed his face and hung his bangs. However, half of the outfit was destroyed, revealing Naruto's muscular form. Half of his plain black bottoms were torn off, revealing a bloody knee. His white bandages around his ankles were bloody as well. Stop hiding, you coward, Naruto shouted with his sword out while channeling Raiden chakra to it. The sudden sound of something moving underground made Naruto jump in the air, his Sharingan blazing to life. Who said I was hiding? A voice said as Naruto was suddenly impaled by several wooden spikes that came from behind. As Naruto's eyes began to turn lifeless, he saw the wooden spikes that were coming from underground approach him. This was it. He had traveled back in time to save the world, yet here he was before he could even do it, smiling at the thought of meeting his parents again and all of his friends. Naruto waited for his doom. Naruto quickly sat up, sweating buckets. Wiping one hand over his eyes, Naruto laid his head back onto the pillow. What was that? It felt so real. Naruto thought, rubbing the places the spikes had impaled him in his dream. Maybe it showed you your future. It's not unheard of that people have dreamt their death, the Kyuubi said. Maybe, but who had Mukten? Naruto thought. Don't know. The last person who used Mukten was that Senju person. Speaking of Senju, I would run if I was you, the Kyuubi said, going back to sleep, leaving a very confused Naruto. Naruto slowly opened his eyes and immediately paling as there sitting up in front of him was Tsunade. What are you doing in my bed, Naruto? She said, the last part growling, making Naruto gulp. Naruto began to tell her how she had fallen asleep on his arm and how she wouldn't let go. Needless to say, by the end Tsunade was blushing heavily. Thank you for taking my watch. I must have been too tired, Tsunade said, still blushing over the fact she had been incredibly clingy. Naruto was about to respond but was interrupted by the sound of Madara. Naruto. Tsunade, get up. I don't care what you two are doing, but we need to leave, Madara said, chuckling at the end. Tsunade blushed again while Naruto was promising himself Madara was going to feel a lot of pain. After they had packed up everything, they had started heading towards the village they had been assigned to protect. Naruto couldn't help but shake his head when he heard Jiraiya ask Tsunade if they did it, to which he got a punch in the back of the head. As they made it to the path leading to the village, the smell of smoke made them all look up, and through the trees they could see the village was under attack. Jumping high into the air, they all landed in the center of the village. Looking around, they could all see broken down doors, smashed windows, dead bodies on the floor, and houses on fire. Working fast, Naruto saw a large group of bandits closing in on two helpless children running at speed. Only Junin-level ninjas could keep up with Naruto. Unsheathed his sword and cut the bandit's head off, surprising the other three. Madara also jumped into action, going through hand seals. Guka Mekyaku no Jutsu, Great Fire Majestic Removal Technique, Madara shouted, releasing a large wall of firing off another large section of bandits. Tsunade, Orochimaru and Jiraiya were all beginning to shake in fear. They had never anyone. They were all brought out of their thoughts when they saw three bandits run at them, swords drawn, preparing to land a blow. Before they could blink, however, Naruto cut through them like they were butter. Looking towards the three shaking genin, Naruto shook his head. Come on, we need to help the villagers. Think about it later, Naruto shouted, getting slow nods. Orochimaru charged at one of the bandits' kunai out. As the bandit turned around, his eyes widened when he felt Orochimaru's kunai slice through his, throating him instantly. Tsunade had also ran ahead, kicking and punching as many bandits as she could. She turned, however, and kicked one of the bandits, sending him flying into a piece of wood that was sticking out. The bandit was immediately impaled. Tsunade went wide-eyed at the thought of the man. However, seeing another bunch of villagers being attacked by some bandits, she ran at them. Jiraiya had also been punching and kicking the bandits. However, he froze when he saw a bandit go to strike him with a sword. Luckily, he was saved by Naruto, who parried the guy's sword. Turning to Jiraiya, Naruto saw the frightened expression and sighed. Kill him, Jiraiya, Naruto said seriously, and chucking a kunai at Jiraiya's feet. Jiraiya slowly picked the kunai up and nodded. The bandit saw Jiraiya's state and laughed. Ha, some pint-sized runt thinks he can me, the man said, running past Naruto straight towards Jiraiya. Without thinking, Jiraiya launched forward and stabbed the kunai in the man's chest. Jiraiya began shaking at the sight but was quickly stopped by Naruto, who placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You had to, Jiraiya. It was you or him. This way you have saved many more people, Naruto said sadly. Jiraiya stood up and nodded, fire burning in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, running towards another bandit. Tsunade, Orochimaru and Jiraiya had been fighting a large section of bandits but were starting to become tired. They must have been at least 300 bandits. They were now down to 40 maximum. Naruto and Madara had been split up from them, and now it looked like the three were fighting an uphill battle. The three were about to stand up but were stopped by the presence of Naruto and Madara. Naruto's Sharingan eyes blazed to life, angrily glaring at the large number of bandits in front of him. You will not hurt my friends, Naruto shouted, his eyes turning to his Mangekyo form, and suddenly the ground began to levitate from underneath the bandits and the air near them all began to twist. Just imagine what Kakashi did to Deidara, but on a way larger scale. What the hell? One of the bandits shouted as his body was beginning to get crushed. For the next minute the sounds of screaming could be heard as Naruto began to crush and then warp all the bandits away courtesy of Kamui. Madara smiled as it appeared Naruto had unlocked yet another Mangekyo technique. Even if he did put way too much chakra into it, he was suddenly brought out of his thoughts when he saw Naruto collapse. Naruto! Tsunade shouted, running over to Naruto, closely followed by Orochimaru and Jiraiya. Knowing a little bit of medical ninjutsu, Tsunade began roaming her hands over Naruto's chest. He'll be alright, he just added too much chakra to his last attack, Madara said, picking up Naruto and walking to where the surviving villagers were, closely followed by the three genin. I've got a feeling that won't be the last set of bandits that attack this village. At least Naruto unlocked another Mangekyo Sharingan technique. I wonder what he'll unlock next. Currently Team 7 and Madara were all sat round the bed Naruto was laying on after the skirmish with the bandits. They had brought Naruto to the small hospital located in the part of the village that wasn't attacked. Madara-sama, is Naruto going to be alright? Tsunade asked as she moved the bangs out of the sleeping Naruto's eyes. Madara watched Tsunade's actions. It was obvious she had gained a crush on his student. He smiled inwardly. Yes, this was definitely something Naruto was going to get teased about. Yes, Naruto will be up soon. He is just suffering from chakra exhaustion. Now if you excuse me, I have to talk to the head of this village, Madara said, walking out of the room, leaving the three genin. Tsunade smiled slightly and looked down at the sleeping body. He was bandaged all over his chest. He also had a bandage around his forehead. His wounds were worse than she had first thought, but once she had gotten him to the hospital, she had bandaged him up, cleaning all his wounds. He was healing relatively faster than he should have been, but she looked past it as she was more grateful he was going to be alright. So did either of you, anyone out there? Jiraiya asked sadly. Both Tsunade and Orochimaru both looked at the ground in shame. Even though Madara had told them that the bandits was for the greater good and they had saved more lives buying them, but they still felt sick at the thought of someone. Yes, Tsunade said regretfully while Orochimaru just nodded. Jiraiya looked at them, uncertain what to say. Naruto had helped him get past his actions, yet he didn't know whether his teammates were suffering. Deciding to let drop the issue, Jiraiya turned to Orochimaru. Hey Orochimaru, Tem want to train? Jiraiya said, knowing that training was one of the few things that would get him to go back to his usual self. Yeah Jiraiya, sure, Orochimaru said, standing up and putting a hand on Tsunade's shoulder, then walking out of the door with Jiraiya. Tsunade watched as her teammates left. As soon as she saw the two leave, she gazed back at the sleeping blonde and smiled. He looked so peaceful laying there. Naruto's mindscape. Inside Naruto's mind, the mighty Kyuubi was gazing over the body of its container. Even though he had the Sharingan, not once had he tried to use the eyes to control him. Over the years and being in Naruto's body, he had seen everything. From his horrible childhood that was filled with hatred and loneliness, the young blonde had always overcome the hatred of the villagers. Even when he had saved the village from pain, there was still those who would mutter demon when he walked past. Even though Naruto never showed any outward sign of pain, the words stung worse than anything. Yet after all this, the boy had still forgiven him. Granted, it wasn't his fault that he had attacked the village guided under the control of the Sharingan, the very exact bloodline the villagers had constantly praised. The important part to the Kyuubi was that Naruto never hated him. He had even thought the Sage of the Six Paths a battle that no mortal could win, yet somehow Naruto had fought for control over his mind and won. It was that moment that both the sage and the Kyuubi knew Naruto was special. Maybe the time had come for him to open up to a human. Every other human had either used him for their own gain or had just locked him up, yet Naruto had taken the time to talk to him and make his time sealed entertaining. Even though he had given Naruto all of his chakra except the part that had kept the Kyuubi alive and also the part that had helped Naruto heal. Now however was the time for the mighty nine-tailed fox to give Naruto something he had never given anyone before. Kid, wake up, the Kyuubi said, channeling a lot of chakra into Naruto's body, immediately healing any wound he had. The Kyuubi watched as Naruto slowly opened his eyes. It was amusing to see the spiky-haired blonde groan about being woken up. Slowly Naruto picked up on his surroundings and looked at the Kyuubi and smiled. Hey Kyuubi, how's it going? Naruto said, making the Kyuubi sweat drop. Only Naruto would do something like this. It's Kurama. Kurama said, making Naruto look at him. Huh? Naruto said. Kurama sighed. Even though Naruto was smarter, he could still be an idiot. My name it's Kurama. Naruto stood wide-eyed. The Nine Tails had given him his name, smirking slightly as he stood up. Really, you have a name? How come you don't tell people? Naruto asked. Of course I have a name, idiot. It's just I only tell those who are worthy to know my name, Kurama asked, groaning when he saw Naruto's grin. So you think I'm worthy? Naruto said. He knew that the now named Kurama was trying to open up to a human. I, shut up. Besides, shouldn't you be waking up now? Your team are worried about you, Kurama said, annoyed that his container had gotten the best of him. Oh right, thanks Kurama-chan, Naruto said while laughing, knowing this was going to make the fox angry. I'll get you back for that brat, Kurama said to himself as he watched Naruto fade out of his mind. However, unknown to Naruto, Kurama liked arguing. It showed him that Naruto did not fear him and had saw him more of a friend. Back in the hospital, Naruto groaned as the light from the window shot into his eyes. Sitting up, Naruto looked towards the window, unaware of the other occupier in the room. Scratching his head, Naruto felt the bandages applied on him. He looked down, checking the bandages wrapped around his chest. He frowned at the thought. Those were not normal bandit, they were trained ninja, which means this is not a C-rank mission, but who would hire this many ninja for one attack? Oh man, why do I always get these type missions? Well, at least I learned Kamui, but it's still nowhere near Madara's. Naruto though, as he rubbed his chest. Suddenly Naruto found himself crushed into an enormous hug by Tsunade. Gasping for air, Naruto looked down at the blonde-haired girl and smiled. Only Tsunade would be this kind. Air, Naruto managed to gasp out as he tried to stop himself from passing out. Sorry Naruto-kun, Tsunade said as she released Naruto from the hug and scratched the back of her head sheepishly. Strangely enough, she had picked up this habit from Naruto. How long have I been out? Naruto asked while removing the bandages around his head and body. Tsunade blushed when Naruto had removed all of the bandages from his body, revealing his well-toned body. You've been out for 1 day. I am surprised that you have healed so fast though. Injuries like yours would have put anyone else out for about a week, Tsunade said, placing her hands over Naruto's chest and making them glow. She was doing was last checkup to see if all of Naruto's organs were okay. It seems you're all better, Tsunade said, smiling. She was shocked however when she saw Naruto jump out of his bed and reach the scroll that was on the table next to his bed. Ah, the benefits of Fuinjutsu, Naruto mused as he pulled out a plain white robe that was tied together by a black belt, black bottoms, black sandals and black gloves. As Naruto looked at his clothes, he remembered he was not alone. Looking towards Tsunade, who apparently was still in a trance over the fact Naruto was able to jump out of his bed. Blushing slightly, Naruto scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Tsunade-chan, I kind of have to get dressed, Naruto said, snapping the blonde Senju out of her thoughts. Shaking her head, Tsunade immediately blushed tomato red. Yes, of course, Tsunade said, walking out of the room, leaving for Naruto to get dressed. Village Leaders Building. Madara was walking through the half-destroyed village. He looked at the workers who were quickly repairing the buildings and any other damages on the village. Something's not right. Bandits should not be able to do that much damage. Even though I had no trouble with any of them, they were definitely not bandits. They were ninja chunin to junin rank, but why were they disguised as bandits? I'm sure the head of the village will be able to shed some light on the matter. Madara thought as he entered the village head's house. It was a large rounded oak building. It was one of the only few buildings that had no damage on it from the attack. As he walked to the main office, Madara couldn't help but sigh at most of the people. Just like Naruto, Madara was getting tired of people bowing to him all the time, however he usually just left it since he knew they wouldn't stop. When he had reached the door, Madara knocked, and after a couple of seconds Madara heard a come in. Opening the door, Madara quickly scanned around the room. He saw the head of the village behind his desk with his head in his palms. Looking over to the window, he saw a young man. He had short black hair and wore a long black robe. Madara narrowed his eyes slightly when he saw the man smirk. "Ah, Madara-sama, I'm glad you came. We have wanted to talk to you for a while, but we understand that you had to look after your student," the man said. Madara looked at the man slightly confused. He knew who the head of the village was, yet he didn't know who this man was. "Excuse me, who are you?" Madara asked, walking forward further into the room. The man scowled slightly. "I am Nezumi Zurui, first assistant to Kairai-sama," Nezumi said smugly. Madara stared at him for a couple of seconds before looking at the man that was sat behind the desk. The man was an elderly man and had gray hair around the side of his head, however the top was completely bald. Madara could clearly see the man was under stress at the moment. Well, half of his village had been destroyed. Who could blame him? "My business is not with you, Nezumi-san. I suggest you leave as you do not hold any importance to this meeting," Madara said coldly. He didn't like Nezumi. The man was far too arrogant for his liking. A flash of anger appeared on Nezumi's face, but it quickly disappeared. "Of course, Madara-sama," Nezumi said quickly, making his way out of the room. As he walked past Madara, a slight smirk grew on his face. Madara stared at Kairai as Nezumi walked past. He didn't trust the man one bit. He was up to something. "Kairai-san, I would like to know why you sent this mission to Konohagakure and labeled it a C-class mission. Those bandits made this mission at least AA class," Madara said threateningly. He added emphasis on the word bandit, hoping to get a reaction out. Kairai. The elderly man looked towards Madara slightly confused. Madara-sama, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't taking care of bandits classed as a C-rank mission?" Kairai asked as he looked up. His eyes showed he was tired. "Yes, under normal circumstances, however. Those so-called bandits that attacked your village were far stronger than normal bandits. They knew ninja techniques. I believe they are hired ninjas disguised as bandits," Madara said as he leaned against the wall, his Sharingan eyes following Kairai's movements. "Why? Who hire ninja to attack the village? I mean, we're just a small village. We don't even have many ninja," Kairai asked, his gaze looking over the folders on his table. "Yes, you are quite right. However, this village is also a part of the Fire Country and also an extension of Konoha. Supplies are transported to here, then to Konoha. Am I correct?" Madara asked. Kairai stood up and walked towards the window. "Yes, we collect supplies that are to be given to Konoha," Kairai said, going into deep thought. Madara also went into thinking. This situation was indeed troubling. The action of attacking a village that is connected to Konoha could lead to war. "Well, whatever the case, we must find the person who hired the ninjas if we are to put a stop to this," Madara said, walking out of the room, leaving a very tired Kairai. Hospital. Naruto looked at himself in the mirror as he finished putting his clothes. He smiled as the clothes fitted perfectly. "Thank God these clothes fit. I'm glad I decided to get rid of all the orange. Looking at these clothes, I wonder why I was so taken in by the color. Maybe it's because of Kurama, or it might be the fact it was the only color I could get as a kid." Naruto frowned at the last thought. His old orange outfit was a real standout. It was one of the reasons he believed the shopowners sold him it, since they couldn't him. They probably hoped that he would die by sticking out enough some enemy ninja would attack him. He was brought out of his thoughts by the sound of knocking on the door. "Naruto, will you hurry up? What are you doing in there?" Tsunade ranted from the other side of the door. Naruto sighed as he wrapped his sword around his waist and walked over to the door. When he opened the door, he found a very annoyed-looking Tsunade. "Hey Tsunade-chan, I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long," Naruto said as he scratched the back of his head. Tsunade gained a tick mark above her eyebrow, growling slightly. Tsunade looked Naruto in the eye. "You're lucky I'm not in the mood to hit anyone, Naruto-kun," Tsunade said, turning around and walking off, leaving a stunned Naruto. "Are you coming or what?" Tsunade said as she continued to walk away. Sighing again, Naruto began to follow her. "Man, she's so troublesome. Ah, I'm turning into Shikamaru," Naruto thought as he caught up to Tsunade. With Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Both Jiraiya and Orochimaru walked around the village looking at sight. What they both found made them both feel sick. There was people left out in the streets using their clothes as shelter since their houses had been destroyed. As they walked into a large clear opening, both Jiraiya and Orochimaru smirked and got into a fighting stance. "You're going down, Tem," Jiraiya said, leaping towards Smirked and also leapt towards Jiraiya. "Kukuku, we'll see, Dobi," Orochimaru said, pulling his leg back hoping to land a kick on Jiraiya's chin. He was surprised however when he saw Jiraiya stop his leg by holding the top of his knee with both hands. Jiraiya span in midair and attempted to land an axe kick on Orochimaru but was unsuccessful as Orochimaru caught his foot with both hands and spun him around several times before letting him go. "He's getting better," Orochimaru said to himself as he saw Jiraiya fly across the field and hit the floor. Standing up, Jiraiya wiped the dirt off his clothes and ran towards Orochimaru again. Orochimaru smiled as he saw Jiraiya run towards him. Dashing forward, Orochimaru tried to sweep Jiraiya's legs from underneath him. His eyes widened when he saw Jiraiya jump over his legs and send a kick to his chin, causing Orochimaru to fly back. "Ha, take that, Tem," Jiraiya said while smiling. Orochimaru stood up and wiped the blood off his bottom lip. "That was good, Jiraiya. I'm surprised you actually hit me," Orochimaru said while walking towards Jiraiya. Even though they were both competitive, they both knew they could not properly spar here since they were on a mission and they didn't want to be so weakened that they couldn't defend the villager themselves. "I think we should stop, Jiraiya. We can't go all out like we usually do. Besides, I'd hate to see what Tsunade would do if she caught us fighting again," Orochimaru said, making Jiraiya shiver. "Hi, you're right, I don't feel like being a punching bag anytime soon," Jiraiya said, sitting down next to Orochimaru. "Who doesn't feel like being a punching bag?" a voice said, making both Jiraiya and Orochimaru turn pale. Well, Orochimaru stayed the same but his face showed extreme fear. As they turned their heads slowly, both Orochimaru and Jiraiya gulped as Tsunade was showing her all too friendly smile, and behind her was Naruto, who was grinning at the pair. "It's good to see you up again, Naruto," Orochimaru said, breaking him out of his and Jiraiya's fear. "Ah, thanks, I was getting sick of just laying around," Naruto said as he walked towards. He smiled as he saw the dirt patched on their clothes. "Couldn't help yourselves, Naruto said, snickering at their reaction. "Naruto?" Orochimaru asked. He had something on his mind for a while now and was curious to know. "Yeah," Naruto replied. He could tell Orochimaru was anxious about something. "What was that move you used to those bandits?" Orochimaru asked. Naruto's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "It was Kamui, a technique from the Sharingan. It warps objects, or in this case people, to another dimension, but once I completely master it I'll be able to teleport and let objects phase through me like Madara-sensei does," Naruto said happily, but inside he was cursing Orochimaru due to his curiosity. "Please don't obsess over the Sharingan, Orochimaru. I'd hate to have to put you down," Naruto thought as he looked at Orochimaru for a few seconds. The sudden change in air made Naruto and the other three genin turn around. The air started to spiral and out of it appeared Madara. Naruto smiled at his sensei's appearance while Tsunade, Jiraiya and Orochimaru were all fascinated over Madara's technique. Madara looked at the four, his lips twitched into a smile nearly when he saw Naruto up. He was at first angry when he had seen his student injured by multiple chest wounds, however he knew the boy would heal, so let it go. "It's good to see you up, Naruto. I was going to drag you out of your bed if you had stayed in there any longer," Madara said, causing Naruto scoff. "Please, as if you could," Naruto said as both he and Madara glared at each other. The three genin shuffled uncomfortably. After a couple of seconds both Naruto and Madara smiled, which soon followed to full-blown laughter. "Ha ha ha, you brat, you're lucky I'm not in the mood to you," Madara said, chuckling slightly. "You know I'm not sure whether you're being serious or not, but I will Kamui you if I have to," Naruto said, activating his Mangekyo. Madara smiled but walked over towards the four genin and sighed. Seeing him sigh, Naruto knew something was up. Madara was barely ever like this. "Alright, you four, I'm going to be honest. I believe this mission is a trap," Madara said, making all the genins except Naruto's eyes widen. A trap, what do you mean Madara-sama? Jiraiya asked confused. I mean I believe we were set up those bandits we versed were not normal bandits, in fact they were trained ninja, Madara said, making their eyes widen even further. I thought so, Naruto said, making Madara raise his eyebrows. What do you mean Naruto? Madara asked. Well, thinking about it, the attack was obviously planned. They knew where the weak spots in the village were so they could easily get in, and I also believed that they were ninjas, so that leads me to my theory. There is a traitor in the village and he hired us hoping to get a easy genin team to beat off, Naruto said, making Madara's eyes widen and the other three look at him strangely. Don't you think you're overthinking it? I mean that's borderline paranoid right there, Jiraiya said truthfully. He wanted the mission to end as fast as he could, but with this theory out it would mean they had bit off more than they could chew. No, I believe Naruto might be onto something here. Also I have an idea on who the traitor is, Madara said. Can we just go beat him up then? Tsunade asked hopefully. I'm afraid not. Without any proof it will look like we are attacking an innocent man, Madara said, getting a groan from the four. Elsewhere, Nezumi was walking through a tunnel on the outskirts of Fire Country. His pace was slightly faster than normal. Reaching the end of the tunnel, Nezumi noticed a large door. Noticing he was at the right door, Nezumi knocked. Come in, a deep voice said from the other side. Nezumi opened the door. Walking into the room, he immediately spotted three figures standing in front of a large desk. There was a shadow covering the three faces. Nezumi, what can I do for you? A voice in the shadows behind the desk said. Nezumi could feel the power radiating off the voice. What do you mean, what can I do for you? You promised me Kairai would be dead. Perhaps I should take my business to someone more capable. Nezumi was stopped suddenly as two thick wooden branches came out of the shadow and picked him up by his neck. You dare question me? I did everything you asked for. I sent a large number of my men to attack your puny village. It's not my fault. You hired a strong Konoha team, the voice in the shadows said. Didn't he think THW would send Madara Uchiha? Nezumi said. He was suddenly dropped by the wooden branches. He immediately started gasping for air. Uchiha Madara, you say? There's quite a high bounty for his head and there is something I want from him anyway. However, at my current state I would most likely lose. I am still not fully healed since my last fight. However, you three should be enough to take care of Madara and his brats, the voice said, getting three nods from the other figures. You hear that, Yeba? Looks like we'll be having some fun after all, one of them said, getting a chuckle from another. Yeah, we've been stuck in here far too long. Let's just hope our skills haven't dulled, Yeba said as he came out of the shadow. The man was average height. He had long red hair and a scar going vertically across his cheek. He wore a plain white top and black pants, but the most noticeable thing was the giant katana on his back. You really shouldn't underestimate your opponents, the tallest of the three said, walking out of the shadow. He had short blonde hair, hazel eyes. He had a large trench coat on and black anbu bottoms. Unlike the rest, he was wearing combat boots. Like Yeba, he had a giant katana on his back. Oh come on, Aniki. He was right. I mean it will be fun, Yeba said, pointing to the final figure. The figure walked out of the shadows and showed a giant scar that went all the way across his face. He wore a brown robe and had silver hair with yellow eyes like the other two. He also held a giant katana. So it's settled. The Totono brothers will help you, Nezumi. Don't worry, these three together should be able to take Madara. He has grown old and weak in his age. Soon he will be nothing but a has-been, the voice said, making Nezumi nod and bow. Thank you, Nezumi continued. You don't need to know my name, besides it's safer that way, the voice said, making Nezumi nod and leave the room. The three figures turned back to the man behind the desk. The two smaller swordsmen smirked while the taller one was bearing a frown. Yeba, Kiwa, you may leave. I need to talk to your brother, the man said, getting nods from the two smaller men. After both of them left, there was a heavy tension in the air. I have a feeling this is a suicide trip, the blonde-haired man said, a hint of venom in his voice. Kukuku Wairi-kun, what makes you think that? You and your brothers have been nothing but useful to me in my quest, the man said, standing up, letting a little light shine on his face, showing one of his green and red eyes before disappearing into the ground. Damn you, we should never have signed up for this. Well, as long as I have my brothers with me, I'll be alright, Ri said, shunshing out of the room. With the Konoha team. The Konoha team were in the same open field they had been in since they had talked about the situation they were in. They had been there 2 days. They had begun to train since they couldn't really leave, since the moment they left the village would probably be attacked again. No, they couldn't leave until they had gotten to the bottom of this. Right now Naruto could be seen practicing Kamui. The technique was exhausting. It was the same as Susanoo. They took a lot of chakra to perform, but after each use it got easier. Naruto was still frustrated with his progress with the Mangekyo's last technique, Amaterasu. He was able to create a little flame, however it was nothing compared to what he had seen Sasuke and Itachi do. He was also frustrated with the progress he was having with the Rinnegan. He could activate it and perform the Shinra Tensei technique. He had tried to use the other techniques he had seen Nagato use, but he was unable. He knew that he had to be patient, but he had to be strong enough to save the world this time and also to fulfill a promise to Tsunade and avenge her grandfather buying Kakuzu. Turning his attention towards his other teammates, he smiled at their training. Jiraiya was sat at the top of a tree with his legs crossed. He was completely still. Naruto smiled. He knew exactly what Jiraiya was doing. He was years away from completing the training, however he was getting there. Naruto then looked towards Orochimaru. He would be lying if he said Orochimaru wasn't a genius. He picked up things almost automatically. He had told Naruto he had planned to find out his chakra affinity as soon as he got back to Konoha so he could learn cool jutsus. Naruto was a little taken back but never showed it, so he just told Orochimaru that knowing loads of jutsus was good and all, but that was not what it meant to be a ninja. Looking towards Tsunade, Naruto smiled again. She was practicing her medical jutsus on the villagers that were hurt. She was really becoming a fine medic. She had partially gained her strength, however she could not completely control her chakra to the point where it shattered boulders. Naruto, how is Amaterasu coming along? Madara shouted from across the field. He had noticed Naruto staring off looking at his teammates. He would be lying if he said he wasn't proud of Naruto. The boy had so much potential. The boy would soon catch up to him if he wasn't careful. Madara knew he was far past his prime. His body wouldn't move like it used to. He was still fast, but compared to his youth he was nothing. His hair had started to turn gray. He had wrinkles on his face. His eyes, however, were the most difficult things to keep up. The strain the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan put on the body was almost unbearable. He had started to restrict the Useage. Looking at Naruto trying to use another of the Mangekyo techniques amazed him. He was 40 before he could even perform all the techniques, yet Naruto had somehow nearly done it in 7 years. All in all, Madara could softly say that Naruto was by far the most important person in his life, almost like a grandson figure. He smiled as soon as the thought passed. Well, it's getting better, but I still can't create a giant flame yet. Naruto asn word. Truthfully, he had also begun trusting Madara. It was still hard to believe this was the same maniac from his timeline, but then again it wasn't really Madara. Well, wake me up when you make some progress, Madara said, jumping to the top of a tree and lying down, instantly falling asleep. Naruto sighed as deactivated his Sharingan. Perhaps he was too tired to continue. The Mangekyo techniques were far more exhausting than anything he had ever done. Sitting his head into the grass, Naruto slowly began to drift off. Bang. Naruto shot up. He turned his head towards the village gate. Was he noticed smoke and fire straight away. Running towards the area, Naruto noticed Jiraiya, Tsunade and Orochimaru missing. Feeling a presence behind him, Naruto started to unsheath his blade. He was stopped, however, when he heard Madara's voice. Naruto, it's just me. I have captured Nezumi, so he can't do anything. However, the monkey's brats ran towards the explosion. Hurry, let's go, Madara said, warping away, leaving Naruto to run. With Jiraiya, Tsunade, Orochimaru. Bang. Tsunade was running towards the gate with both Jiraiya and Orochimaru by the side of her. I think we should have waited for Naruto and Madara-sama, Orochimaru said as they continued running. Tsunade nodded while Jiraiya looked slightly confused. Why, if it's anything like last time we won't need them, Jiraiya said, getting a sigh from Orochimaru. No, Jiraiya, this won't be anything like last time, Orochimaru said as they stopped in front of the destroyed gate. The smoke covered everywhere. Slowly, however, 3 figures stepped out of the smoke. These must be Madara's brats, Yeba said, walking towards them unsheathing his sword. We don't have time for this, we have to finish them. I'm sorry little ones, but your time has come, Ri said as his blonde hair waved in the wind. Unsheathing his sword faster than anyone could see, he rushed towards Tsunade. As he was about to land the final blow, his eyes widened. With Naruto. Naruto jumped on top of another building. He was rushing as fast as he could. As he reached the last house before the gates, his eyes widened as he saw someone leaping towards Tsunade intending to land a blow. Acting fast, he released his weights and unsheathed his sword and rushed towards them. Village gates. Everyone's eyes widened as they heard the sound of metal hitting metal, as there stood Naruto holding Ri's blade off with his own. Catching him off guard, Naruto swiped his leg and kicked him back towards his brothers. Ri's feet skidded off the ground. He never got knocked over, but there was power behind the kick. He looked up to see Naruto glaring at him with his azure eyes. Ri's eyes turned slightly to behind the four. He smiled as he saw Madara appear. Uchiha Madara, I'm glad you have come. Now we can take you back to our master, Ri said, dashing off again, this time faster than Naruto could follow. Activating his Sharingans, Naruto turned towards Madara and threw his Hiraishin trench knife. As Ri was about to hit Madara, he looked confused as he saw the man with his arms crossed, not even caring that he was about to die. However, the sight of a trench knife fly past his face caused him to stop. However, the yellow flash that came after caught him off guard as Naruto appeared from out of nowhere. Your fight is with me, Naruto said, getting into a stance. Ri sighed. He never enjoyed it, however it was his job and by God he was going to complete it. Very well. Yeba, Kiwa, you take care of them three and I'll take care of Madara and this brat, Ri said as he also got into a stance. Madara-sensei, I'll take care of this, please protect the other three, Naruto said seriously. He knew the man in front of him was good. The speed he showed was unbelievable. He was at least in A rank. Okay Naruto, but don't die and remember what I taught you, Madara said, looking towards the other brothers. Hear that, Yeba? We get to 3 brats and an old relic. This should be fun, Kiwa said happily as he and Yeba leapt towards the 4. Naruto took a side glance and let the breath he had been holding out, turning his attention back to the man in front of him. Naruto sighed. Naruto, was it? Ri asked, getting a nod from the blonde. I'm sorry, but this is the end for you, Ri said, running towards Naruto. We'll see, Naruto replied, also running towards Ri. Both fighters jumped at the same time and swiped, hoping to land a hit. They were both surprised when neither attack had caused any damage to each other, landing in a crouch position. Looks like you're better than I thought, Ri said, stated as he stood up and turned around. Well, should we get serious? Naruto said, activating his Mangekyo, surprising Ri. Defiantly, Ri said, launching towards Naruto again. The sounds of swords clashing caused everyone to look towards the source. Tsunade and Jiraiya's eyes widened when they saw Naruto and Ri clashing with each other with ferocious snarls on their faces. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he felt Ri's strength in the attack. He could tell Ri wasn't the type to use ninjutsu or genjutsu, but man, he could feel the strength behind his swing. Letting out a small growl, Naruto took a step back and went to swipe Ri's legs. Ri was just as surprised at Naruto's strength. It had felt like he had ran into a brick wall. However, he would not lose. He had too much at stake. His eyes widened as he felt his legs being took from beneath him. What? I didn't even see his movements, Ri thought as he narrowed his eyes and went to land a kick on Naruto's chin. It would have hit if it weren't for Naruto quickly stabbing his katana into the ground and front flipped over him and landed behind Ri with his knees bent. Naruto quickly swung his blade around, hoping to land a hit on Ri as the man was falling. However, just as the blade was about to meet his head, Ri positioned his sword so the blades would meet. Both fighters jumped away after the exchange, both thinking of different things. He's strong, no pushover, but I know his weakness lies within ninjutsu. However, which ones could I use to end this quickly? Naruto thought while examining his surroundings. The ground was lightly burnt from the brothers' attack on the village, but it still didn't look that bad. Who is this kid? I've heard Konoha have strong shinobi, but at this age, I can barely keep up and his attack are only getting stronger. I hope Yeba and Kiwa are taking care of themselves, Ri thought as he looked over towards his two younger brothers and his eyes widened in fear. Meanwhile, come on Yeba, we can kick there. They've only got an old man, a creepy looking kid, a whore and a kid who likes to put paint on himself, Kiwa shouted in triumph, hoping to anger the Konoha shinobi. Meanwhile Tsunade's eyebrow was twitching like crazy. Whore, I'm going to him, she thought in anger, preparing to attack. Jiraiya was just as upset, if not more. The idea of someone calling his marks just paint. He had copied his sensei because it had looked cool, yet now someone was mocking him. However, Madara and Orochimaru were not affected at all, since they knew what the guy was trying to do and just smirked. Well, show us what you've got, fools, Madara said calmly. He knew that Kiwa and Yeba seemed to be very emotional and would be easily riled up. What? We aren't fools, we're the great Yeba-sama and Kiwa-sama, Yeba said proudly, puffing out his chest, and smiled when he saw Kiwa rush ahead with his blade out, preparing to attack Madara. Madara sighed in annoyance. This is the type of warriors that exist these days, fools, they don't even know who their opponents are. Just as Kiwa's blade was about to hit Madara, he smiled and looked smugly towards the aged Uchiha. However, the last thing he saw was the spinning of the Sharingan. What? Yeba shouted as he saw his brother's arms just drop and his head bend over. He ran towards his brother and his eyes widened. Shit, the Sharingan were not meant to look directly at it, Rini told us, and we forgot, Yeba thought as he backed off in fear, trying to grab his brother's arms and make a run. Why are you running? You're the ones who attacked the village, you should be able to die like men, Madara said as he walked towards them and pulling out two kunais. Leave us alone, Yeba stuttered in fear, but just as he was about to turn, he felt his body become heavier, his chest become damper, and his breath to become, well, heavier. Looking down, he noticed the large river of blood flowing down to his chest. He looked over to Kiwa and noticed he had fallen the ground, a puddle of blood flowing underneath him. It was then he realized his throat had been sliced. Goodbye Rini, we're sorry, Yeba thought as he collapsed into the ground. Tsunade and Jiraiya looked away slightly at the sight they had seen Madara get behind them and slice their necks, and the fountain of blood that came with it was not a pleasant sight at all. Now that's done, we should check if anyone in the village is hurt, since Naruto can handle himself, Madara said, walking towards the village. Both Jiraiya and Orochimaru nodded and walked towards them as well. However, Tsunade stayed still and turned to the fight Naruto was having and ran towards them. Tsunade! Jiraiya shouted and attempted to run after her, but Madara had firmly placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping his movements. Madara-sama, Jiraiya said quietly as he looked at the man, confusion written across his face. Leave her, she intends to help Naruto, we have other priorities, Madara said with a commanding voice. Slowly Jiraiya nodded and walked off with Madara and Orochimaru. With Naruto, Kiwa, Yeba, I'm sorry, I promised I would protect you. I promised both of you we would eventually live a good life, not die like common dogs. Damn you Kakuzu, we were merely a gauge stick to you, weren't we? Ri thought in anger. Naruto, kill me, Ri said in a defeated tone. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw Ri lower his blade. I refuse, to anyone who is defenseless, Naruto said, gritting his teeth. Please, just do it, Ri said again, looking up, his eyes were brimmed with tears. No, Naruto said. However, he narrowed his eyes as he felt the air heat up his Sharingan. Eyes widened when he saw the chakra input of Ri's sword. Fine, all you then, that blonde behind you, Ri said, lifting his sword up and letting flames surround the sharp metal. Blonde. Naruto turned his eyes to where Ri had looked and seethed in anger. So he would people I care about because he can't get his wish. Fine, I'll grant his wish, Naruto said, his eyes morphing into his Uzumaki swirl. He looked down at his blade and enhanced it with wind chakra, letting a blue outline appear. Please work, Naruto thought as he concentrated intently on his blade, and suddenly his black flames shot out and increased in size due to the wind chakra. Let's do this, Naruto said, running forwards. He knew words like telling someone to not give up on life after they had witnessed everything taking away was pointless, since it had happened to him and he was ready to die. Ri only nodded and ran forwards, his sword danced with a red flame. Seconds seemed like hours as Tsunade watched. She was awed by the power Naruto had. The black flame surrounding his blade looked intimidating to say the least. Please don't die, Naruto-kun, Tsunade whispered as she watched both blades clash in an explosion. At the moment of impact, all one could see was a giant black flame versus a giant red flame. The heat radiating of the clash was unbelievable. There were fire jutsus that were not as hot as this explosion. And in flash it was all over. All the smoke from the fires rose up into the clouds, being absorbed by the atmosphere and leaving two figures in the smoke. Seems like you won. Ri said. His blade snapped and he fell to his knees, his breath becoming raspy. Naruto sighed sadly as he looked behind him. They had ended up landing behind one another. No, I didn't win, neither of us did, Naruto said, turning around, finally showing his appearance. His top had been burnt, showing his developed body. It was not as toned as it was in the past, but he had blamed that on his younger appearance and he would soon grow back into it. He had light burn marks around his body but nothing serious, unlike Ri. The man had a large gash in his stomach. He had his hand covering it, however there was no way to stop the blood that was overflowing his hand. Ri turned around to look at Naruto and smiled. So it seems, however, the winner is not the victor of the duel, it is the victor of opinions. Seeing you fight, I can see the passion in your eyes to not lose the ones you cherish. I realize that is what I had lost long ago. Naruto, I need to tell you that the one responsible for this is. Ri was suddenly cut off as a giant thick branch slammed into Ri, sending him flying into another direction. Both Naruto and Tsunade's eyes widened at the sight. Mukden, they both thought as they looked at the branch that had extended at least 20 meters. Their eyes followed towards the beginning of the branch to see who the attacker was. However, the attacker was wearing a long trench coat and had his face covered with his hood. To think some brats would be able to defeat Ri, the hooded man said, the wooden branch reverting back into him. Who are you? Tsunade asked, stuttering slightly as she felt droplets of water hit her shoulders. You shouldn't be concerned of such things since you are going to die, Senju Tsunade, the man said, causing both genin to take step back. How do you know me? Tsunade said, unconsciously taking a step closer to Naruto. Oh, I know all about you, Senju, especially your grandfather, the mysterious man said while lifting his head so it was still shadowed except for his eyes. Naruto gasped when he saw the familiar-looking eyes, the red eyes and green pupil. There was only one man who had that shade. Kakuzu, Naruto growled in an almost whispering tone, however both Tsunade and Kakuzu heard. What's this blonde-haired brat knowing who I am? I wonder how, Kakuzu said in an arrogant tone and pulling his hood down, showing his long black hair and dark-toned skin. Naruto, what do you mean? Are you telling me this is Kakuzu, the man whoed my grandfather? Tsunade asked, her fists tightening. Yeah, he's the one, all right, Naruto said, activating his Sharingan and holding up his katana in a defensive position. Sharingan. Are you an Uchiha? I don't think I've ever heard about a blonde Uchiha, Kakuzu asked, an evil smirk appearing across his face. Maybe not, who knows, Naruto said, trying to confuse Kakuzu even if it's just a little. However, his thoughts were running wildly. Why did he seem so happy when he saw my Sharingan? Also, what's up with him having Mukden? He could never use it when I defeated him before. Wait, does this have something to do with my dream? Naruto thought, however his eyes widened when he felt a presence behind him. What? Naruto barely moved in time as Kakuzu had appeared behind him with a kunai and attempting to slash him. Seems you're pretty good, Kakuzu said, vanishing in a blur, making Naruto and Tsunade's eyes widen. You're too slow, Naruto heard someone whisper in his ear. Without thinking, Naruto swiped his katana hoping to land a hit on Kakuzu, but was surprised yet again when he found nothing but air. How? Naruto asked, jumping next to Tsunade while still in a defensive stance. Ah, I see, you noticed it wasn't natural speed. You're right, it's a bloodline called swift release, Kakuzu said, shocking the blonde even further. Wait, what? He never had this ability either. What's in the world is going on? Naruto thought as he tried to see Kakuzu's movements through the rain. Now let's see how good you really are, Kakuzu said, raising his hand towards Naruto and raised his hand to block the giant wooden branch that had appeared. A gust of wind going past his face, what? He thought as he opened his eyes only to see the branch going past his face and heading towards Tsunade. Thinking fast he threw his katana towards Tsunade hoping to intercept the thick branch, and just as the blade was about to reach Tsunade he vanished in a yellow flash. Tsunade's eyes widened when she saw the giant wooden tree branch coming towards her. This can't be happening, I can't beat by my grandfather's own techniques, she thought. Her eyes widened when she saw Naruto's katana coming towards her as it had beaten Kakuzu's move in speed. He appeared in front of her and wrapped her in a hug. His back was facing away from the attack. She closed her eyes and waited for their incoming doom. Shinra Tensei, Naruto said quietly into her ear, and she gasped when she saw the wooden branch slowly get blown away as well as the surrounding area. Naruto sighed as he panted. That move had took a lot out of him. He was still unfamiliar with the Rinnegan. He would always either use too much power or not enough, however it seemed he had used a bit too much. What an interesting technique. What was it? Kakuzu asked as he appeared from the ground. None of your business, Naruto growled as he slowly turned around, deactivating his Rinnegan. You're all full of surprises and secrets, aren't you? Naruto, was it? Kakuzu asked, disappearing in a blur behind Tsunade and attempting to slash her with a kunai. Naruto shoved Tsunade onto the ground, taking the slice from Kakuzu. He hadn't known what had caused him to take the attack, perhaps it was instinct. Naruto, Tsunade asked as she slowly pushed herself off the muddy ground. Her eyes widened when she saw a large gash on Naruto's chest. That was foolish, boy, Kakuzu said, kicking Naruto in the chin, sending him skidding across the ground. Naruto, Tsunade shouted, jumping up hoping to land an attack on Kakuzu, however he sidestepped and let her fist go past. His eyes widened when he saw the miniature crater she had made when her fist had hit the ground. Stay still, bastard, she growled, swinging her other hand backwards trying to land a chop on him. She was surprised when he caught her hand. Interesting choice of attach, channeling chakra at the point of release, doubling, even trebling the power, he said in an amused tone before he punched her in the face, sending her next to Naruto, who was slowly getting up with a cut lip. Now to put you out of your misery, you could become a problem to me if I allowed you to live, Kakuzu said as he walked towards them, his hand turning into a wooden spike. However, just as he was about to take another step, he stopped at the sight of the air twisting. It seems like my apprentice is having a little trouble, Madara said, his Mangekyo Sharingan flaring. Uchiha Madara, what a surprise. However, with your presence here it looks like I have no choice but to retreat for now, but I will come back for you, and especially you too, Kakuzu said, looking towards Naruto and Tsunade before disappearing into the ground. Thank God that's over, Naruto said as he collapsed into the mud face first. Naruto-kun, Tsunade said, running towards him and turning him over so he was laying on his back and his head in her knees. She quickly passed her hands over his chest, her hands glowing green as his wound slowly closed, however his panting never. Thank you, Tsunade-chan, Naruto said as he closed his eyes, letting darkness take him. Tsunade's eyes widened as he passed out. She was about to try wake him before she heard Madara's voice. Let him rest. He's overexhausted himself from using the Sharingan and from the looks of things the Rinnegan as well, the old Uchiha said as he grabbed both Tsunade's and Naruto's shoulder and disappeared to an empty room in the village and laid Naruto on the bed. Tomorrow they could leave and Konoha would send a building team to help with repairs. Madara smiled slightly as he saw Tsunade holding Naruto's hand as she sat next to his bed. It was quite ironic how his newest greatest accomplishment and his rival's granddaughter were crushing on each other. His thoughts turned slightly sour at the thought of Kakuzu. Of course he had seen the pieces of wood lying around, but how did he get mooked in? It was thought impossible. Perhaps there was more to the story than he had first thought. Also, why was he looking for him? Was it a clue? Did he just want to the founders of Konoha? Sighing, he vanished again to tell Jiraiya and Orochimaru the plan, that they were leaving tomorrow and that they could get some rest. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel trouble brewing up ahead and he did not like it. Naruto groaned as he painfully opened his eyes. He could faintly hear the sounds of muffled whispers. Was that guy really that strong? Naruto recognized Jiraiya's voice. Yeah, Naruto-kun and I stood no chance. He was on a completely different level, and I'm certain if Madara-sama hadn't shown up we'd be dead, Tsunade said in a shaky voice as she was still shook up that she had been face to face with her grandfather's and that he had almosted her and Naruto. You mentioned he showed multiple bloodlines, how is that possible? Orochimaru asked. He was curious over the fact there was someone who could use Mukten Jutsu and Jinten, a deadly combination for any shinobi. Yeah, I don't know how, but he was able to use my grandfather's techniques, Tsunade muttered while sighing. It's because he acquired your grandfather's heart. The three genins' heads snapped towards Naruto, watching as he painfully sat up in the bed he was in to look at them. Looking at the three of them, Naruto smiled a little as he noticed they didn't seem injured. Tsunade still had a bandage around her head, but the other two looked unscathed. Naruto-kun, are you alright? Tsunade said, jumping out of her chair and rushing towards Naruto's bedside. Yeah, I'm still not used to the amount of chakra the Rinnegan uses though, Naruto said, still feeling a little exhausted from his earlier battle. He briefly wondered how Nagato had leveled Konoha and still have enough chakra to fight him. He quickly shrugged the thought off, however, as he reasoned that Nagato had decades to master the Rinnegan. Well, you've seen better days, that's for sure, Jiraiya joked, getting a chuckle from Orochimaru. Naruto gave a slight glare towards the two before sighing. It was still strange to see the two of them act friendly towards each other, almost brother-like. One thing for sure, going back in time did really open his eyes. He could appreciate now how hard it must have been for Jiraiya to fight Orochimaru. He's right, all you ever seem to be doing lately is getting injured. Stop being so careless, Naruto-kun, Tsunade said, placing her hands onto her hips and glaring at Naruto, making him shrink under her gaze. Sure. Naruto stuttered, a nostalgic feeling sweeping through him as if he was back in his original timeline where Tsunade had scolded him for being reckless on a mission. Seeing her glare soften, Naruto smiled and looked down towards his chest. His right shoulder was bandaged from where he had taken Kakuzu's attack. It wasn't a big cut, however, he was certain it would scar. Where's Madara-sensei? Naruto asked, curious to where his teacher was. It was unlike the man to not be around. He left saying he was going to take care of a pest, Orochimaru told Naruto before pulling out a scroll and reading it. Figures, Naruto groaned, laying back down and trying to figure out the whole situation of the mission. With Madara, please stop, I don't know anything, Nezumi cried as he was pushed against a wall, trying to pull away the hands that were around his throat. Stop lying. I don't know why, but I know you're working with Kakuzu, so I'm going to give you two options. 1, you either tell me and perhaps your life will be spared, or option 2, you don't tell me, I find out anyway and you right here. Madara growled in annoyance as he tightened his hand around the neck of Nezumi. I swear I don't know anything, Nezumi cried. How could Madara know? He had been careful not to do anything suspicious and was certain Madara was bluffing. So you choose option 2 then? Madara said, his eyes changing into his 3-tomo Sharingan, and stared straight into the eyes of Nezumi, placing him into a genjutsu. What was your goal in working with Kakuzu? Madara asked, still staring into the now dull eyes of Nezumi. I hired Kakuzu to assassinate Kairai and to use his death to become the leader of this village, Nezumi said in a stoic voice. I see. Power was your goal, then why did you contact Konoha? Madara asked, the urge to this man rising after each passing second. So I could use the death of the shinobis to prove we didn't need Konoha's help, Nezumi said in the same stoic voice. You were that hungry for power you would try break away from Konoha and lose all the protection you had, Madara growled, his eyes morphing into his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Amaterasu, Madara said, closing his left eye. Immediately black flames engulfed around the head of Nezumiing him instantly before spreading around his body and reducing him to nothing but ashes. Hashirama, can there really be peace with people like this around? Madara asked to himself, looking into the sky and thinking about his once long gone friend, and thought back to all the times they had talked about creating peace. After a couple of seconds, Madara looked back down and walked out of the alley he was in and walked down the road leading to where Naruto was. The village was still in a state, however they could rebuild and start anew now that the root of the problems had been taken care of. That brat better be up or I'm going to kick his. Madara thought, thinking about his blonde-haired student. With Naruto, I still find it hard to believe this guy Kakuzu could have become that strong without anyone noticing, Orochimaru said, frowning at the thought of someone being so strong and without anyone noticing. It really sent shivers down his spine. Yeah, not to mention barely anybody knows anything about him. I wonder what he's after, Jiraiya agreed with his friend, also frowning. Whatever he's after, he's certainly going to cause trouble in the future, Naruto summed up, frowning as well as he tried to link similarities between the Kakuzu he knew and this one. He of course knew of Kakuzu's ability to absorb hearts and gain the elemental ability that the owner of the heart had, but could it be he had found a way to gain bloodlines? How had things changed so drastically to the point history was changing itself? Naruto-kun, how did you know that was Kakuzu? I heard you say his name during the battle, but you've never met him before, have you? How did you know what he looked like? Tsunade said, snapping Naruto away from his thoughts and looked towards the blonde-haired girl. That's a question I'd also like to know. Naruto turned his head again at the sound of his sensei walking into the room, and from his expression Naruto could tell he wasn't playing around. The night Shadaime-sama died, I checked the bingo books for Kakuzu. You mentioned he was a missing nin, so I thought that would be the best way to know what I'd be up against. Naruto lied. It was a quick answer, and from the narrowing of his sensei's eyes he could tell Madara knew something was off. However, he was grateful the answer seemed to please Jiraiya, Orochimaru and Tsunade. Fair enough, but I want you to get ready. We're leaving the village in the next couple of hours, Madara stated, throwing Naruto's clothes at him. Did we complete the mission? Naruto asked, putting his top on and quickly standing up, not realizing he was only in his boxer shorts, causing both Jiraiya and Orochimaru to snicker and Tsunade to blush. Yes, there won't be any attacks on the village anymore, Madara stated, his eyebrow twitching at his student's idiocy. Oh, that's good, Naruto said in relief, turning around only to notice a snickering Jiraiya and Orochimaru and a blushing Tsunade. Raising his eyebrow in confusion, Naruto slowly looked down only to see his boxer shorts on. Okay. Naruto started tightening his fists. Who the hell undressed me? Naruto shouted, and finally both Jiraiya and Orochimaru busted out laughing. 10 minutes later, the team from Konoha could be seen walking down the streets of the partially destroyed village. The rebuilding had already started as workers were already starting to repair the broken houses and walls. I can't believe you undressed me, Tsunade, Naruto muttered, walking with his head down slightly to hide the blush that was painted across his cheeks. I had too. You had injuries all over your legs. If anything, you should be thanking me, Tsunade replied, a small blush over across her cheeks. What an idiot, he didn't even notice, Jiraiya chuckled while Orochimaru nodded, also sharing a laugh at Naruto's expense. What are you two stupid weirdos laughing at? Naruto shouted towards them, embarrassed that these two were laughing at him. Hey, I'm not weird, Jiraiya shouted back. I'm not stupid, Orochimaru said quietly. Alright, that's enough. I need you four to shut up when we meet with Kairai-san, Madara said sternly. Arriving at Kairai's office, Naruto and the other three genin stood behind Madara as they walked in. Immediately Naruto noticed Kairai stood up, looking out of his window, a frown etched onto his face. Kairai-san, Madara said, getting the attention of the man. Oh, Madara-sama, I was expecting you. I had received word you had completed the mission, Kairai said in a happy tone while Madara frowned. Nezumi is dead, Madara stated, causing everyone but Naruto and Madara to widen their eyes. What? But how? Kairai shouted in disbelief that his right-hand man had been. Why'd him? Madara stated again, causing Kairai to back up slightly. Why? Kairai said, dropping to his knees. Because he was the cause of everything, Madara said, getting the village leader's attention. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the information he was receiving. He knew there was something off with Nezumi. Everything about him shouted rat, and his obsession of making people listen to his orders without checking with Kairai only seemed to make it worse. Nezumi confessed to me moments before. Why'd him? He told me he wanted your position. He was going to use your death as leap to power, and he would use the chaos and confusion your death would cause to become in charge. Madara frowned as the words came out of his mouth. So he was planning on taking over, but why? Jiraiya asked, confused. To him the man was kind. Yeah, he may be a little creepy, but the guy seemed harmless. Yes, he hired Kakuzu to assassinate Kairai-san, but there was a problem, Madara continued. Us, Naruto said, getting looks from everyone and a nod from Madara. Ah, yes, it was Nezumi's idea to ask Konoha for help. Why would he go through all the trouble when he could have justed me? Kairai said. Ah, it would seem that way. However, he was the one to send for Konoha's help and class the mission lower than what it should have been. In order for any teams Konoha did send, they would fail. Madara growled while Naruto couldn't help but feel a slight wave of deja vu pass through him. Why? Tsunade asked, feeling more and more hatred towards Nezumi as she learned more of his hideous acts. To break away from Konoha, Madara said, getting gasps from everyone. He wanted to rule on his own, and by showing that Konoha couldn't complete a mission he would use it against the village and possibly ally himself with another. Madara finished with a sigh before staring at Kairai. However, that isn't the worst part, Madara said, shocking everyone. You knew, didn't you, Kairai-san? Madara glanced towards the man only to see him looking down in shame. I had my suspicions, but I couldn't. I raised him since he was a boy, treated him like my own, and so I ignored my suspicions hoping he would change, but I should have seen this coming. Ever since he was little he had a deep hatred towards Konoha, Kairai said, and it was only now the Konoha team could hear the age in his voice. He sounded tired. What happened? Tsunade asked, wanting to know why someone would be so angry at the village her grandfather had helped create. Because his parents were by Konoha ninja. It was an accident. Hashirama-sama had messaged me immediately informing the boy's parents had been by a stray explosive tag, and ever since then he had held a deep hatred towards Konoha in his heart. Kairai finished sitting down and placing his hand over his forehead, mourning the loss of someone he had thought his family. I see. So it was revenge. I guess it always is, Madara stated, as both himself and Naruto thought the same thing. Anyway, I have sent a message to Hokage-sama and sent the appropriate payment. You are free to leave whenever you want, Kairai informed. However, as he was saying the words, Tsunade had noticed water droplets falling from the old man's eyes and stepped forward to check if the man was all right, but before she could step forward again, Naruto had placed his arm in front of her, stopping her from moving. Naruto-kun, Tsunade whispered, looking at him while he shook his head. Let's go, Naruto muttered, walking past Tsunade and out of the office. I agree, we've spent enough time here, Madara said as the three genin followed him out of the door, leaving a broken-hearted old man behind. Later, outside the village, the team from Konoha stood just outside of the village. The genins were staring at the village in sadness while Madara stared impassively. Naruto sighed at glum atmosphere that was around. It seemed no matter how this mission had went, someone would have ended up hurt. Of course, in his timeline he had been in situations like that constantly. However, it seemed like no matter what the timeline was, there'd always be people who experienced pain. We should have helped him. How could we leave him like that? Tsunade said to the rest of the Konoha team, snapping Naruto out of his thoughts. What could we have done? Naruto asked, looking at her. We could have said something at least. He's lost the only piece of family he had. Naruto-kun, you of all people should know what that feels like, Tsunade said firmly, causing both Jiraiya and Orochimaru to gasp and Naruto to widen his eyes before glaring slightly. What makes you think you could understand how I feel? Do you know what it's like to your own brother? Naruto asked, his eyes as cold as ice. Naru, Tsunade started before Naruto cut her off. I've seen things you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, Naruto muttered while Madara watched on. Nothing we could say to him would make him feel better. Do you know what it must have felt like to be around the ones that were responsible for his son's death? Our presence would have only made it more painful. Not many people have the heart to be around the ones responsible for their loved one's death, Naruto continued before turning around. We're not playing a kid's game where a few simple words will make everything go away. This is the real world. You need to let go of any naive thought where everything will go as you planned, as in this world you fail more often than you win. Naruto clenched his fists and lowered his head before walking. Wait, Naruto-kun, Tsunade shouted, trying to run after Naruto, however was stopped as Madara placed his hand on her shoulder. Just leave me alone for a little while, okay? Naruto said as he turned around and gave the Konoha team a small fake smile and disappeared in a yellow flash. I'm sorry, Tsunade whispered as tears fell from her eyes, regretting bringing up Naruto's past and from the emotional stress she was suffering from the mission. Let's go, I think we could all use some rest after this, Madara said with sigh, signaling for Orochimaru and Jiraiya to come towards him. Grab hold, Madara commanded as the air started to twist around him and he disappeared in midair. Konoha. Naruto appeared in a yellow flash inside the Namikaze house. It was a pretty small house, in all a 5-bedroom house with quite a bit of outside space. Naruto had actually given a large part of the Namikaze compound to Konoha as he wouldn't be needing it, not to mention he was able to give homeless ninjas and civilians places to live. As Naruto appeared, he immediately fell to his knees. His hair was covering his eyes, however the water tracks flowing down his face indicated he was crying. Why is the world like this? No matter what I do, people are always hurt, Naruto thought, clenching his fists. His parents believed in him, everyone did, yet he felt he was letting them down constantly. Quickly snapping his head up, Naruto revealed his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. It seemed whenever his emotions took over him, his Sharingan always came to life. He wondered briefly if this happened to every Uchiha. I'm too tired to be dealing with this shit right now, Naruto said, glaring into space before getting up and walking towards his bedroom and flopping onto the bed, immediately going to sleep, allowing all his fatigue to catch up with him. Hokage office. Hiruzen Sarutobi sighed as he filled out another form. It was a reply to Kumogakure informing the Nadaime Raikage that there would be 3 teams competing in the Chunin exams Kumogakure were holding. The Chunin exams was still relatively new to Hiruzen, as back in the days when he was a genin there was no such thing, and his sensei the Nadaime Hokage had only told him about them just